Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, April 29th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Dr. Michael Osterholm, Director of the Center for Infections of Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota, on where do we go from here. Meanwhile, GOP mask off as moves to so-called open their state's economies are just to undermine workers. Meanwhile, Trump says no more stimulus, just raids of Social Security funds. This is all the while GDP and consumer confidence plunges. But fortunately, U.S. to lend $500 billion to corporations with zero strings. New data suggests significantly more deaths than have been reported. And new documents show, surprise, Roger Stone lied. He was in contact with Julian Assange. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, 52 coronavirus cases tied to the Wisconsin election. That's on the Wisconsin and U.S. Supreme Court and Republicans in the State House in Wisconsin. And Donald Trump sort of orders meat plants to stay open. In New York, Andrew Yang sues over the shuttering of the primary. Justin Amash may run for president, and Megan Harper sadly loses in Ohio. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. I should also add Joe Biden won in the presidential primary there in Ohio, to the extent that that is still relevant. It's obviously in no way surprising. He's the only person who is whose campaign is active in the presidential race. We have a pre-taped interview today. I did this Friday morning with Dr. Osterholm. He is one epidemiologist in the country. I think he did an interview with Joe Rogan. I think it was in early March or February, late February. 14 million views. Fascinating stuff. It's also amazing to me how much we do not seem to know at this point about the coronavirus. I have been reading and talking to some experts in this, and there is they are still not totally clear as to how much antibodies you need in your system to be protected from reinfection. It seems that the virus does not necessarily reactivate like some viruses do. In other words, go dormant in your body and then reactivate. But again, we need to know a lot more about the virus. And the right, in many respects, is taking advantage of these sort of unknowns about the virus to fill that vacuum with complete fictions. I mean, there apparently are people who are making a lot of money out of this. You know, we talked about yesterday how Diamond and Silk got fired from Fox Nation because they were suggesting that the coronavirus was a function of 5G technology. We should be so lucky it has not been rolled out in this country in the way that we were promised it would be by this point. But so in addition to all the smart stuff in your home, your smart refrigerator that you'll have because of 5G, they would let you believe that you also get coronavirus from it. Now, that's way out of bounds. So we'll fire them. However, one of our top shows in primetime will just espouse absolute lies and nonsense. We will cover some of that later in the program. And we will talk about Donald Trump's, really, there's a 1-2-3 punch going on here. One is the states are basically culling their unemployment rolls by forcing people to come into work. The federal government intends to help in that effort by, if Mitch McConnell has his way, extending essentially immunity from and releasing employers from their statutory obligation to provide a safe work environment under our OSHA laws. And therefore they can't be sued. So they'll open up. Their employees will either come in or not come in because they will not be able to get unemployment if they don't come in. They'll work until they get sick, and then there'll be no recourse on the for them because these corporations, these businesses will have immunity. And then the third punch is Donald Trump is claiming no more. And these are the negotiations going in. Some of this is kabuki. Donald Trump saying no stimulus checks. We're just going to do payroll cuts from Social Security. Now, that should be obvious to everyone that, A, we're going to have 40 million people who have lost their jobs. It's again going to force people to come in to work in these places where they have no protections, because otherwise, how do you get any cut on your Social Security taxes if you're not working and getting a paycheck? And then, of course, I guess it's really a 1-2-3-4 punch, because it sets up the Republicans to cut Social Security and push for that in the event a Democratic president wins, or even if Donald Trump is president in a year. Because, look, the Social Security funds have been depleted. So that's what's going on there. We'll hopefully get more in depth in a moment. Just a bit of house cleaning. A reminder, this show relies on your support. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. But also, if you have been watching the AM Quickie on YouTube, as opposed to, say, like Instagram, where it was just liked by AOC, which was very exciting for Dorsey and for me. But if you've been watching on YouTube, know that we have switched it over to our backup YouTube channel, which is Majority Report Live. So it's youtube.com/Majority Report Live. It will live there going forward. We may dip it in to the current channel, but that's where you will find it going forward. So if you're looking for the AM Quickie, that's where it is. youtube.com/Majority Report Live. Here is Donald Trump playing the hits again. Sometimes the oldies were so great that you can't let go of them. I know you all remember that back in February 28th, back when we were living sort of normal lives, more or less, Donald Trump said that the coronavirus will disappear like a miracle. Just one day will go away. Maybe it would be the warm weather. Who knows? And, maybe that'll be the case, but not before it takes the lives of thousands and tens of thousands of Americans. But he liked it so much the first time. Yesterday at the White House, he tried it again.
Remarks that you feel the worst of the pandemic is behind us. But without a treatment, without a vaccine, the state's now reopening. How can you be so sure?
Well, I think that, like other things, we're going to come up with a vaccine. You never know about a vaccine, but tremendous progress has been made. Johnson & Johnson and Oxford and lots of good things. You've been hearing the same things as I do. Tremendous progress has been made, we think, on a vaccine. You always have to say think, and then you have to test it, and that takes a period of time. But a lot of movement and a lot of progress has been made on a vaccine. But I think what happens is it's going to go away. This is going to go away. And whether it comes back in a modified form in the fall, we'll be able to handle it. We'll be able to put out spurts. And we're very prepared to handle it. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about it, the invisible enemy. It's a bad enemy. It's a very tough enemy, but we've learned a lot. It's in 184 countries, as you hear me say often. It's hard to believe. It's inconceivable. It should have been stopped at the source, which was China. It should have been stopped very much at the source, but it wasn't. And now we have 184 countries going through hell. But I think that a lot of good things are going to happen, and I really believe that fourth quarter is going to be maybe tremendous, and the next year I think has a chance to be really getting close to record setting. We hope so. We hope we can be back where we were. We had the strongest economy anywhere in the world, and I hope we're going to be back there again. Go ahead, please.
I don't think so.
How much confidence are people feeling now? Do people feel better? It's just going to go away. We have an epidemiologist on the program today, and it won't just go away. We may at one point reach herd immunity. There's only one route to get to herd immunity. And the numbers that we have in New York, let's say New York City, it's possible anywhere from 15 to 20, 25%, probably closer to 15% of people have already been infected. And we know at what cost that came in terms of deaths. And probably illnesses that will cause long-term medical issues. And so it may take another 20,000, 30,000 more deaths to get to close to herd immunity, to get to close. Maybe it'll be 40,000 in New York. And that assumes that we don't have a surge where it spikes, where we overrun capacity. We didn't overrun capacity last time, but who knows what happens in the next peak. But of course, around the country, we're looking closer to 5%. And we have now had at least over 50,000, close to 60,000 deaths that are directly attributable to coronavirus. Peace and Scientific American that made clear that the way that we count flu deaths is algorithmic. So the way that we've been counting coronavirus deaths, without looking at the disparities of year-to-year deaths that are, we're starting to see numbers now. The Times had a piece today where it's, if you compare the month of April or the month of March, let's say, to prior Marches and Aprils, we have this unaccounted for spike in deaths that don't include the coronavirus deaths. And this is happening all over the country and in different countries. It is reasonable to assume that those deaths are a function of coronavirus. There's no other reason why we would have unaccounted for deaths. Now, it could be a function of coronavirus directly. It could also be a function of people aren't getting treatment because coronavirus has overwhelmed our medical system enough that people can't go in and get treated for other things. That's possible. But in terms of actual counting of coronavirus deaths, where the people die and they are on their birth certificate, coronavirus is at least one of the causes of deaths. If you were to calculate flu deaths annually in that way, the top amount of flu deaths we would have would be somewhere around 16,000. And they would range from about 3,000 to 16,000. But things are extrapolated. So the number of coronavirus deaths relative to the flu, we've done this in 1 month with coronavirus, is it's not even close. It's far more lethal. But Donald Trump, he liked it so well the first time that he said it would just go away. He figured he'd try it again.
Makes me think of the Beach Boys, Wouldn't It Be Nice? Just playing.
Yes. That would be good, actually. But we don't want to get dinged for copyright. I mean, the polling is starting to show that people are just simply not listening to Donald Trump anymore. And I think I read that the top networks have decided they're not going to cover the press conferences anymore because he's just pumping out disinformation. But let me say this too. This ad is a warning. Our democracy, as you probably know, is under attack from the U.S. Supreme Court. In the middle of a deadly global pandemic, people across Wisconsin were planning on voting absentee to keep themselves and their families safe. But the night before the election, 5 Republican justices on the Supreme Court told thousands of people they would have to choose between risking their lives and forfeiting their right to vote. As of today, the AP reports at least 50 plus people contracted coronavirus on that day. The Supreme Court favoring Republican interests over our democracy is nothing new. They gutted the Voting Rights Act. They invited billionaires and corporations to spend unlimited amounts trying to influence elections. They gave a green light to gerrymandering, voter ID laws, and voter roll purges. Now, a progressive movement is rising up to fight back, because it's quite possible the Wisconsin case won't be the last 2020 showdown over voting rights to be settled in the courts. We simply cannot trust this court to put aside partisan views and protect people's right to vote. Our courts are becoming too political. It's time to say enough. Learn about how you can join the fight by visiting demandjustice.org/majority. That's demandjustice.org/majority. Folks know that I really have been touting that organization since its inception. I don't know, I guess about maybe a year ago or something. I'm not sure. I should also tell you this episode is brought to you by Magic Spoon. Breakfast cereal is one of the best parts of being a kid, right? For Matt, too, even now. Sit down, bowl of cereal, milk. You drink the milk after the cereal's gone. A complete breakfast all in a bowl. But as an adult, you realize all your favorites full of sugar, full of junk. Magic Spoon is a new cereal company that's discovered a way to recreate your favorite childhood cereals with, you ready for this? 0 sugar. 12 grams of protein and only 3 net grams of carbs in each serving. Magic Spoon offers 4 flavors based on the all-time classics: cocoa, fruity, frosted, and blueberry. Plus a variety pack that lets you try them all. They've recreated the taste and the texture of classic sugary cereal, but it tastes so incredible, you'd never guess that it's actually healthy. It's keto-friendly, it's gluten-free, it's grain-free, it's soy-free, it's low-carb, and it's GMO-free. For me, personally, cocoa. That's the one I go for. I don't even know if you're allowed to say the name of the cereal that, well, there was a couple of them, I guess, but I know the one I'm thinking of. I don't know if they want me to say that name, but it's that one. And also the one with the vampire with the cocoa. It's delicious. And I got to say, the best thing about it, I can get my kids to eat it too. And instead of eating the crappy sugary cereals that they want, they're eating what they think are sugary cereals, but not. Go to magicspoon.com/majority report. Grab a variety pack. Try it today. Use the promo code majority report at checkout to get free shipping. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they refund your money. No questions asked whatsoever. That's magicspoon.com/majority report. Use the code majority report for free shipping. And lastly, speaking of shipping, if you've got a growing business, if you're thinking about starting something now while we're all stuck inside, Shippo is your new secret weapon. Shippo is the only shipping software for growing businesses that you can start today, set up in minutes, and then ship today. Shippo's volume discounts save you up to 90% off of carrier rates. You simply connect your online store to Shippo. You don't need any coding or technical experience at all. And instantly you see the lowest shipping rates from over 55 top global carriers like UPS, USPS, FedEx, DHL. So if you got any type of online store, all you got to do is you just click, you print, you ship. They have automated return labels that are free. You only pay if your customers use them. Companies that use Shippo save thousands of dollars. They free up hours and they grow on average 77% each year. Join over 100,000 companies like Goat, Hims, MeUndies who use Shippo. For our listeners, they're offering their best discount available anywhere. Get a shipping consultation and a Shipping Pro Plan 6-month trial. You ready for this? For free at goshippo.com/report. That's a $700 value for free at goshippo.com/report. They want you to try this because they know it's going to work out for you. You go right now, you get your shipping consultation and Shippo Pro Plan 6-month trial for free at goshippo.com/report. All right, going to take a quick break. When we come back, an interview I recorded with Dr. Michael Osterholm of the Center for Infections and Disease Research and Policy at University of Minnesota a couple of days ago. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. On the phone, Dr. Michael Osterholm. He is the director of Center for Infectious Disease and Research and Policy. Welcome to the program, Doctor.
Thank you.
And I should also say that you are obviously author of Deadliest Enemy, Our War Against Killer Germs, which was from 2017, and warned about I don't know the exact, but the situation that we're in now, just to provide that context. Well, let me ask you this, because I've seen interviews that I saw you on Rogan's show in early March. Just give me a sense of where we are now in terms of how you would have predicted we would be at this point.
Well, once we predicted this was going to be a pandemic, the only model we really had to base it upon is influenza pandemics. Remember, pandemics are worldwide epidemics, and we realized as early as mid-January that the transmission occurring in China surely did mean that we were going to see this person-to-person transmission around the world. Based on, at the time, what we saw for how fast the cases were multiplying, in other words, doubling about every 5 days, that it would take a period of a month or more once outside of China before it would really start to show up in communities. So it would go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 cases. And that then at that point in late February, early March, we'd begin to see these case clusters, including some hot spots in larger demographic areas, occur around the world, which it did. Now the challenge is beyond that, we don't know how this coronavirus is going to act in terms of an influenza-like picture. If it does, what we could surely expect is we could have an initial set of these hot spots with transmission in countries, but not nearing at all the kind of transmission you'd expect to see with a big peak of cases, meaning that in the United States, for example, right now, our best guesstimate is that, you know, anywhere from 5 to 15% of the population has been infected. regardless of where you're at, whether it's in New York, where we've had a great deal of activity, still at most 15% infected there. In many other parts of the country, about 5%. So that the next step is, well, what's going to happen? And there's really several scenarios, but they're all based on the following. And that is that this virus is not going to rest. It is going to keep seeking humans until it gets to about 60 or 70% of the population infected. By that time, we'd have enough infected individuals who would likely and hopefully be immune, that would mean that it would help put, in a sense, immune rods in the virus transmission reaction, so that I wouldn't transmit to people if 70% were now immune, and it would eventually start to die out some. But to get to 70%, where you only have 5 or 15% currently having never had it, that leaves a lot of people left to get infected. So then how does that play out? Well, if it's like influenza and pandemics of the past, where this new influenza virus emerges, 2 started in the winter of the last 10, by the way, in the world over the last 250 years. 2 started in the winter, 3 started in the spring, 2 started in the summer, and 3 started in the winter of our northern hemisphere. In every instance, the big peak occurred about 6 months after the initial peaks occurred. And so you could say if this is going to be like that, we could surely expect in the fall a big peak of cases. Now, why these early peaks occurred and then went away, we don't know. If you look at these influenza pandemics, it wasn't because of human behavior at the time that somehow changed them. Now, I do believe that what we've done recently is flatten the curve, as the term has become known, to basically hold down cases with our distancing activities. But what it'll do in the future, I think, is still really unclear. The other options are that we could just continue to see the kind of activity we see now, almost kind of a whack-a-mole type thing, where it pops up somewhere, we try to shut it down with distancing, and we keep going on until we get closer and closer to that 60 to 70% infection rate. We could have a situation where it's just slow burn, just constant, just from here on out. But the magic number is going to be that 60 to 70% infection before we see this slow down. Now, the one thing that can change that, of course, is a vaccine. But, that means we're talking at least 16 to 18 months, I believe, before we would ever see vaccine actually researched, approved, manufactured, and distributed worldwide to actually have an impact on this. So between now and the next 15 to 16 months is going to be a real challenge for us.
So if the only realistic path for this to end is to get to that 60 to 70% infection rate, is the challenge now from a public health policy and I guess just broadly a public policy to essentially reach a number of, let's say, daily infections that is the highest number possible that could allow for our healthcare system to absorb? I mean, is that essentially the challenge? If you were in charge, if anybody were in charge, it feels like, but if you were in charge of essentially outlining the plan, would that be the strategic goal?
Yes, I think 2 things. One is, first of all, we've got to have a plan. We can't just assume that we're either going to be in lockdown mode. And this is not just about the economy, because it's easy at that point to assume it's about dollars and cents versus lives. And it's not that. It's about our livelihood. It's about the society that we know. We can't lock down worldwide for 18 or 20 months hoping for a vaccine. At the same time, we can't just let this go willy-nilly, because in fact, when these big increases occur, they really will bring down healthcare systems. There very easily could be millions of deaths. And on top of that, the people who have other conditions will be largely denied access to healthcare because the systems will be under such strain. So that all the other illnesses that we think of will also be compromised in terms of how we deal with heart attacks, accidents, asthma, etc. So what I keep coming back to is what I talk about, threading the rope through the needle. We've got to find a way in that middle ground to say that how do we craft a response that is quickly able to determine that cases appear to be increasing, and we locally, regionally apply distancing techniques to try to slow it down. And then ease off again when we are able to demonstrate the cases are coming down, that the healthcare system has capacity to handle more surge. Healthcare workers are protected because there's enough preventive equipment available, and that we can feel confident that, we can kind of do what we're trying to do right now. But I think the additional challenge with that is that we know that this disease is very, very different in how it impacts people by age and by underlying risk factors, meaning diabetes, heart disease, certain cancers, hypertension, and obesity. And those people are at a much, much higher risk of having a serious illness and dying. So is there a way to help bring back into everyday life the younger population under age 40, for example, who will have a much lower risk of having a serious illness or and even a fatal case? And with the idea that we're not forcing them back in, but should there be a permissive way that we allow them back in? If they get infected, we want them to not transmit it to others who are in high risk of having severe outcomes. But each time one of those people get infected and recover and develop immunity, which again we're assuming will provide protection, we've put one more rod in that virus transmission reactor that will help slow things down. And that person now not only is not in a position to get infected themselves, but as well as the fact they can now interact with people who haven't been infected and feel confident and comfortable they're not going to transmit the virus to them. So that's the kind of discussion we need to have today, and it's a tough one. We've had tough ones already about deciding who gets a ventilator and who doesn't, and what that means, the life and death decisions. But we also need to have a societal discussion today. And I've seen people say, well, if you let any case happen, you're basically putting the economy over human life. No, this virus is doing that. This virus is very, very capable of continuing to march on no matter how hard we try to suppress it. There'll be cases. Look at places like Singapore, Japan, models just months ago of the way to do it to control it, and today they're both in national states of emergency. So our job is to figure out how to thread this rope through the needle and to get us through to what will hopefully be a vaccine with the fewest number of people who are impacted of serious illness or deaths, who we don't overrun the healthcare system, and yet we maintain a sense of society and the livelihoods that we all know we have to do.
So this is going to be too rough, but and maybe you can sort of point out where there's the where the math maybe is not wrong, but really the calculus is wrong. So if the idea is that we need to get to 60 to 70%, that that means that there is an inevitability of X amount of deaths. We don't know what X amount of deaths is because the variables is what you're saying is that if we were to, let's just look at New York City, because that's obviously the densest part, and that's so far been one of the, well, certainly by sheer numbers, the biggest epicenter. But so if we were to basically say, okay, everyone under the age of 40 in good health, you go out, and the idea is that we want to try and get as close as we can to 60 to 70% of infection, with the least amount of deaths, because that's the strongest, or relative to the virus population that we have, and get there as quickly as we can. So if I was to look at the number of, we've had 15,000 deaths at this point, partly as a function of the shutdown, partly as a function of not having shut down, earlier. Can do you have folks who are sitting down sort of crunching those numbers and saying the high end of what we anticipate would be deaths if we were to do something like put 40-year-olds out there, and the low end is this?
Well, again, I think it comes back to, we don't want anybody to get infected, okay? So what I'm suggesting is if they do participate in everyday life again, as we once knew, and they do get infected, I'm giving you the consequences of their chances of having a serious illness or dying, their ability to maintain a society as we know it, and at the same time, their situation in terms of, yes, you're right, putting rods in the reaction, but I wouldn't have them go back in it just to put rods in the reaction. I wouldn't do that. I'm just saying that if they happen, they actually contribute to that. You know, if I had the perfect magic wand, I'd freeze everything right now in human and virus time except one thing, and that's vaccine development. And then miraculously, 16 or 18 months from now, we just drop that vaccine in and then let time start again. We can't do that. So what we're trying to figure out is how do we navigate this? It's like gravity. You might not like it, but it works, and it's going to work consistently everywhere all the time. This virus is going to keep transmitting, whether we like it or not. So our job is to figure out how can we minimize the number of deaths, the serious illnesses, and the overall impact to society, because I think everyone agrees. I find no one that agrees with the idea that we can shut down society for 18 months and come out the other end and not be a completely changed world in a negative way.
Right.
So what our job is to thread all those together. And I think the most important thing is just like this discussion right here you and I are having right now. We need to have this discussion to get this started so that it's not seen as someone who is, you know, has a position that, well, these people are okay casualties. They're acceptable casualties.
Right.
Let them go.
No,
that's not it at all. It's how to have that discussion. And so I think this is why this kind of discussion we're having right now is really important.
Well, and I don't want to be too dogged, but I understand the idea that we want to minimize deaths, but I don't, and that there's an inevitability of infection. But do we really want to minimize? I mean, let's just stipulate that 18 months we will get a vaccine. But I don't know how safe it is to stipulate that. But let's just stipulate it for the sake of this conversation. How?
Yep, I agree.
How can we? It seems like there's a little bit of a gray zone in there in terms of like, yes, I certainly don't want to say I want people to be infected. I certainly don't want to be infected. But at the same time, we need if we're not going to follow down the trajectory of we're inside for 18 months and all the things that come with that problematically, we need people to get infected on some level, right? I mean, it's inevitable, but the idea is that we probably want to attempt to control which cohorts of our society get infected.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the kind of discussion, again, I would say the gray zone, if rheostat-wise, let me make a friendly amendment here. I would suggest that if we can control infection and keeping people out there, I mean, new ways of distancing, for example. You know, let me just give you one that has been presented to me for my input. What if we brought back Major League Baseball, but there was nobody in the stands? It was only the players and the management, you know, that were there, but we televised it. And the people who did the television work were up in the stands itself, isolated. Would that be a new normal? Well, we've never done that before, but could we do that and actually bring back society in a way that, hey, we're all going home and watch our TV today because we got baseball on? Now, this is the kind of thing we're talking about is how can you bring back society where you're actually creatively, I mean, look at what happened to the airplanes. Now, we'd all agree that, you know, I feel badly for the airline industry, but we're seeing airlines that normally would be flying 2 million passengers a day, flying 30,000. Will that ever come back again? You know, I think about how many meetings I went to around the world for a day. I'd fly to Geneva 3 to 4 days out of my schedule, jet lag, 1 day meeting, and now today I do it online. And so I think that some of the things we're also talking about is how to more creatively hold back some of what was before. It's not an either or anymore. You know, it's either nothing and we're locked down or it's back to normal.
I see.
And so what we're trying to do is craft a society, and we're trying to craft a way to move with this virus. And I think you were right on the mark when you said, are we going to have a vaccine? We have to be very careful and say we don't know. We hope we can. Yesterday there were data that came out in the first studies out of China looking at a vaccine in monkeys that were challenged with the virus after they had been vaccinated, and it looked pretty promising. You know, now that doesn't mean it's coming anytime soon, but I think there's reason to hope. So I think what we're looking for is this kind of creative energy to get us to the end of this, so we have that vaccine.
Okay, and so if you were in charge, right? I mean, and it does. I mean, well, I mean, it does. I mean, frankly, it does really feel like we have a vacuum of leadership on this. We have a daily news brief, I guess you could call that, from the president, who's out there literally yesterday saying that, encouraging people, or just saying, like, throwing it out there as if we were just spitballing on, drinking Clorox or something. I mean, that's sheer insanity. But more to the point is that while he's doing that, there's no one behind the curtain going, all right, this is what we're really doing, and looking at a big board here. And I don't know, frankly, how we get there with this administration. I honestly have no concept of how you can have any type of leadership in this context. But if you were that person, would you say that, like, look, we're going to there are going to be cohorts that can go out there, I mean, I get a better idea of what you're talking about when you say the baseball, which is like, let's find areas that will minimize the infection. But if we are this active in minimizing the infection, isn't then the end game just a vaccine? I mean, because we could.
Well, the end game is a vaccine. You're absolutely right. The end game is a vaccine. So what I'm trying to do is, it's kind of a three-order effect here. We're trying to hold back the virus. We're trying to keep society from basically imploding as we know it.
Right.
And we're trying to move that vaccine to get us together. So I think that's the combination. But I think, for example, I participated in a meeting where the medical ethicists raised some incredible questions about ventilator use. And we know that, being on a ventilator in of itself is a bad outcome for this disease.
Right.
But the question was, if we have a young man who's a quad, who basically is being kept alive on a ventilator, and he may have X number of years of life yet, but if his ventilator was available over the course of the next 6 months, we might be able to save 10 lives with that ventilator. And their whole question was, if we don't have any more, do we take his ventilator and give it to those 10 people over time? And those are incredibly, incredibly horrible discussions. And they're tough because it's about maximizing it. So what I'm saying, at a population level, we have to be prepared to have these discussions. But ideally, what we want to do is get us to the point of where we minimize deaths, we minimize transmission, we maximize society, and we get ourselves a vaccine. And however you slice it, it's going to be tough discussions. Getting back to the question you just raised, let me just, say, for what it's worth, because I'm just a soldier in the public health army. I have been for 45 years, and I salute the same flag and the same commander, regardless of who the public health leadership or the elected leadership are of this country. I've served in the last 5 presidential administrations. Even this one, I was a science envoy for the State Department for a year. I'm sure at the university. I served 2 Democratic governors, 2 Republican governors, and 1 independent governor in Minnesota as state epidemiologist. And my family couldn't tell you my partisan politics when it comes to those issues. But having said that, I would agree with you 100% right now. Leadership is everything. We're going to have a really, really tough time with this situation. There's nothing easy about it. And I wish we had somebody right now that could do fireside chats. I wish we could have somebody that would just straight talk and just tell us what we know and what we don't know and what we're going to do to get around it. And, somebody's going to tell us we're going to have some hard times, but this is what we're going to do. So number one, I think if I had to do anything right now, is instill that sense of leadership, that sense of trust. This is not a partisan issue. I said 4 weeks ago, when this was starting to evolve into a red and blue state issue, a red and blue county issue, I said, you just wait. There won't be red and blue. There'll be COVID color. Look what's happening right now in rural America in the agricultural belt that were primarily red states, and see how this virus is sweeping through there right now, changing everything. Nobody's red and blue anymore in those counties. They're COVID. And so I think that's what we need, is that kind of leadership, first of all. Second of all, there are things we can do right now. This testing fiasco, we need to test, but don't let more people just come and say, test. What happened was in December with Wuhan, there was a need for new reagents, the chemicals that run these tests, that were well above and beyond normal consumption for the world. But we were able to expand within the reagent manufacturing world to make more of it. But then when the whole world caught on fire and everybody wanted these reagents, instead of going from a garden hose basically evolving into a fire hose, we suddenly needed a canal worth of these reagents. And today we can't get testing done because of the shortage. Where is our Marshall Plan that the United States could and should lead with the private sector to get these reagents? Instead, we have an argument every day about, is testing really available or not? Right. That's the kind of leadership we need right now.
And just to be clear,
need that.
Reagents are essentially the chemical that would allow you to take the sample from the swab and get it into a testing the scenario. And so
exactly.
And frankly, you need to use the Defense Production Act to get somebody. I don't know what company it is. You might even have a better notion of it. You may have a couple companies in mind who have the facilities and could start producing this stuff tomorrow.
Well, that's a challenge. First of all, if you were your whole business was around making widgets, and suddenly you're being made to ask mechanical ventilators. Ventilators, by the way, that on average have over 1,500 parts and come from a number of different countries, find machine parts. That's a challenge. But within the industry of reagent making, what do you do to ramp up? What does it take to build that extra capacity? And how do you do it? But you need that leadership. You need coordination. You need somebody to direct it, like a field general. And I could go through a laundry list of these things. The PPE issue, the N95 respirators, the same thing. And so that's the kind of leadership we need right now. I don't want to hear any more about how many products have been delivered that day, okay? Because if you're telling me you're delivering 2 million N95 respirators, that sounds great. But when you realize that the orders that were standing and needed immediately number 12 million, what did 2 million do? Right. I mean, it surely helped. But we need that kind of honest discourse and say, we're short here, but this is what we're going to do. You know, if you really want to understand where we should be right now, go back and listen to FDR and go back and listen to Winston Churchill. You know, they taught us how to do this. They told us hard things, but they told us how we're going to get through it. So that's where I would come from, and I would incorporate these kinds of issues. I mean, a good example right now, I'm a public health guy, okay? I'm fully acknowledging that. I think the lack of CDC's role in national policy discussions on modeling and all the things we do has been horrible shortcoming. And, you know, it's like going to war, but deciding because for whatever reason you didn't like the tank division, you're not going to bring the tanks in.
Right.
You know, that's not helpful.
And it's really, I think the proper analogy is you don't like the color of the tanks. I mean, there's a real sense that the way this thing is being organized is by the whims of, you know, with all due respect to my daughter, a junior high school kid, essentially, who is not really assessing what different. It seems to be a function of just like, who's giving me bad news? You're out of the picture. But I know I have a couple minutes here with you because I know that you have a heart out here. Let me just ask you this.
Yeah.
What do we know about this disease now, particularly in terms of its transmission? I mean, should we be washing down, if I get a box from UPS in cardboard, should I be washing that down? Should I be doing that with bags? Should I?
Yeah.
I mean, what is the best practices that we understand now, and how has that changed over the past 2 months, let's say?
Yeah, the first, second, and third order of transmission with this virus is air, 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 and air. Okay? We now know that respiratory transmission is by far the major component piece of transmission. And it's not just air right around you. Unfortunately, it does include what we call aerosols, these things that you and I have been generating the whole time in this conversation. In whatever room each of us are in, we've pretty much got those floating around. Think about the last time you saw sunlight coming through the window in your home or your place of work, and you saw that stuff floating on it, and you thought, boy, this is pretty dusty in here. Those are aerosols. Those actually from you and I just talking. We create those, okay? And so that's a challenge. These are the same aerosols, by the way, when you go to a department store and you're 4 aisles away, you can smell the perfume section. And so that is a problem. This is a readily transmitted virus by that way. Some people transmit to very few people. We have some household settings where someone doesn't transmit to anybody. Then we have those situations where some people transmit to as many as 50 to 100 people. And so the transmission is variable. I think the question, though, that you really wanted to get at was those all that surface contamination. Do I need to wipe everything off? This plays a very, very small role, if much at all. in the transmission of this virus. The idea of contaminating a surface and touching it and putting it to your face. Clearly, your eyes do have receptor cells for this virus. They could become infected through the eye, but it really is a small role. So it is about breathing air, and this is where distancing does come in. If I'm not right in that same room a long period of time with someone, I have a much lower chance of getting infected.
If someone's in my car, let's say they're infected, and I come into that car 5 hours later, is the aerosol still in there? Does it make sense for me to go like, well, I'll get in the car, but I'm opening both doors first and I'm going to let it air out for 10 minutes?
Yeah. If somebody was in the car with you or before me, and they were infected, literally just opening the car doors and letting air through there, that'll dissipate quickly. That's what I'd be concerned about. I wouldn't be so concerned about, any other part of the car. Just letting that air out. That's important.
So, and the upside, I guess, of heading into summer is that people can, if they want to socialize and you're 6-7 feet away across a porch or stairs or on the street, and you're out in the open, that's a much better place to be than inside a room.
Absolutely. I just got an email this morning from a very creative father who wants to have his son's team play baseball this summer, and in light of our baseball discussion. And he had a very elaborate way to keep the kids apart, even to the extent that they have team balls for which one team handles, the other team doesn't, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. The umpire stands behind the pitcher as opposed to behind the plate. To even have a catcher, you just have him stand back by the screen, pick up the ball. And he was really thinking creatively about how could we get these kids together and keep them apart far enough outside that, we don't just end that. And, that's the kind of creative thinking we need right now. I mean, I would say frankly, the risk is probably very low of that.
The biggest problem, though, is that, I do this, every day I read about this stuff. And there's been no source of information that has said, we're around the edges, air, but there's been no source of information that has said the simple things that you have said that, give me a sense of like where I should be most careful, where I shouldn't. Like, we just don't hear that. There's nobody announcing that information.
Well, we're trying. Okay. When we every day we focus on, do we have enough tests or not? Every day, when we focus on what's the source of this, whether it's a Chinese war weapon, intentional release, etc., we're missing exactly the points we're saying. I've been saying for 3 months, we are learning how to die with this virus, and it's horrible, it's painful. Personally, it's impacted me. But you know what? We have to also figure out how to live with it until we can get to the point of where hopefully we're going to have that magic bullet. So this kind of discussion we're having right now is exactly the kind everybody needs to be having about how do we live with this thing. And so I couldn't agree with you more. You're absolutely right. This is what we need for information.
Dr. Michael Osterholm, thank you so much for your time today. I can't thank you enough, and I really hope we have the opportunity to do this again. I know you're incredibly busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, and I think you're having this conversation. It's people like you in our communities that can help legitimize and help put forward and actually demand this kind of conversation. You can demand this kind of, leadership as such. So I just want to thank you, and I hope more people take you up on the kind of discussions you're putting forward here. This is what we need right now. We need this. That's the leadership we're talking about.
Michael Osterholm, thank you very much. Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy. Thanks again. All right, folks. You can get, we'll put a link to that center and the information they're putting out. And maybe we'll do that to Osterholm's book. But, spoiler alert, we know what happens in terms of the pandemic. And it really is, and again, I think Osterholm is one of the top epidemiologists in the country, but I still feel like my sense is we're still learning about this disease. So I think it's better to be, personally, from my perspective, I would rather err on the side of being too cautious than not. But, in terms of like, I'll wash things down if maybe. But I think at the very least, that sensitivity to distance and to air and in being in confined spaces with folks is a really important thing to keep in mind. We're going to take a break and head into the fun half. Michael Brooks will be joining me there, as we will also be taking phone calls. A reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You could support this program by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, we give you extra content every day, on top of which you're also making the free show possible. And, advertising a little bit rough these days, but I don't know if it will get better, but my hope is it will at least stabilize. So it is really our members who are carrying us through at this time, and I want to thank them very much. And again, if you're somebody who does not have the resources to become a member, or you're concerned, or you're already a member and you're concerned about your finances, if you're a member already, head over to the cancellation page. We have some options for you. And if you're not a member and you want access to the content and you don't have the resources, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. We will lock nobody out for money reasons. Really, we just lock out people for attitude reasons. But I haven't done that in a long time. I almost did it to somebody recently. Called in and says, like, you're jamming Joe Biden down my throat or something like that. And I think they had already claimed that they had quit. So I was like, well, all right. But don't forget, last night was Tuesday night, TMBS. Matt, who was on there?
Yeah, we had Yolian Ogbu, organizer, and Judah Friedlander, the comedian. And actually, David Griscom and I had to conduct the interview for a little bit because Michael's internet was not behaving well. So we talked to him about comedy and politics for about an hour. It was really nice.
Oh, that's good. So you can check out the Matt and Griscom's interview stylings with Judah Friedlander on TMBS. Also, check out Noah McKee's show, The Noah McKee Show, on patreon.com or youtube.com, The Noah McKee Const Show. Also, The Antifada. Check that out at patreon.com, The Antifada. And Matt, what's happening on Literary Hangover, or as I call it, the bandwidth chewer upper that denies everybody else, apparently, in your block, it feels like.
I don't know about that, but the Literary Hangover, we just did a new podcast episode on Daniel Defoe's A Journal from the Plague Year, which was written in 1722, 2 years after the last instance of the plague flared up in France. And it was set, the novel, it's sort of a novel slash journal.
Wait, when was this? What
year? The novel was written in 1722, 2 years after the 1720 outbreak of the plague.
1720 plague, okay.
But the novel is about a journal set in the 1665 outbreak of the plague in London, from the point of view of a guy who has like servants and stuff and who he didn't prepare for terribly well. And he has to have those conversations. Like, actually, you're not coming with me to the suburbs. Good luck in London. That was a big dynamic. So we talk about that sort of stuff. So yeah, check that out. And also subscribe to me on Twitch if you do that, twitch.tv/literary hangover. Doing a lot of groundbreaking stuff over there, I think.
Did you know that there was a pandemic in 1890?
I'm not aware of that one.
And so a lot of people, when the 1918 pandemic happened, had experience with it.
In Defoe's journal, he talks about how there's a woman who was around from the 1630s, and she would only give advice to women. Wouldn't give advice to men about the 1665 one. So interesting tactics.
Very odd. Very odd. Strange times. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we head back, fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabs.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
You think I might be a Nazi?
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Oh, wait a second. We are back. Where's Michael, guys?
Good question. Let's get him on. Hold on.
Okay. Let's go to the phones while we wait. Calling from a 267 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
Yes, it is you.
Oh my God. Oh wow. All right. Hey. I'm so glad that I got through. I have to get off in a couple of minutes.
All right. Can you get on the can you just talk more into your phone a little bit more?
How about this? Is this working?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm nervous. I have so much respect for you. My name is Mercedes. I'm from Philadelphia.
Hi, Mercedes.
I'm a student here.
Great.
Hi. You might have brought this up earlier in the show. I don't know. I wasn't tuned in. I was just watching a video that you had posted yesterday where you were talking with Nomiki Kant about, voting for Biden, what with these allegations from Tara Reid and so on and so forth. And, you were kind of just saying that abstaining from voting is like this, it's kind of self-righteous, and it's like this moral stance that doesn't really do anybody any good. And that was the exact same argument that I made for voting for Hillary Clinton last time around. I was like, this is not about you. This is not about your moral purity, whatever. You need to you need to do what's right for the country. You need to vote for Hillary. And then the same thing with Joe Biden after Bernie dropped out. I was like, okay, there's these allegations against him, but like nothing's proven. There's no real evidence. Like I was still willing to just hold my nose and do it. And then the more evidence that comes out about this, the more I'm like, and the more clips that come up of him saying things about like all of our problems are to be blamed on young people, and him saying, the stuff about like him equating poor people with people of color and talking, whatever that random rant was about playing the radio. And it's like, you start to realize that either vote here is propping up a class of people who do not have, they don't have empathy for my generation. They don't have empathy for people of color. They don't understand the political climate. And it's like, I get that it's a two-party system. I don't want Trump to win a second term, but where is the line? Where is, like, am I now going to go vote for a rapist who I do believe is a sexist, who I do believe is part of this class of men who's just like, oh, women are objects and I am part of the political elite and I have this certain degree of money and I will treat them however I please because that is how society works. And I will do the exact same with, people of color. At a certain point, it's just like, when does it stop being worth it? When does it start being like, okay, this is a whole class of people who I can no longer support, I can no longer work with, and we have to fight them no matter who's in power.
Well,
and
I'm not saying that you shouldn't fight them who's in power, but the question is, when does it become worth it to not vote in this circumstance? When
does it stop being worth it to vote for Joe Biden? Like, at what point does he become so despicable?
I can answer it. I mean, I can give you the short version, and it's not. I mean, look, this sucks. It sucks, and there's nothing that you've said in terms of characterizing him that I think isn't accurate. But I can also answer that the question fairly easily. When you think. And I think, you should also keep in mind you're voting for an administration. But when you think a Biden administration would ignore a pandemic, that's when I would not vote for him. When you think a Biden administration would attempt to get liability removed from workers, when you think a Biden administration would coerce states and convince states to open up so that they could purposely throw people off unemployment rolls. When you think a Biden administration would be sending back, privatizing stuff that they have procured for hospitals and allowing it to be essentially profiteering in the course of a pandemic. All of those things, if that was the case, I wouldn't have much to say. There's other things that we could backfill, but since all of this is right in front of us, there's your answer. You don't have to think anything different from Joe Biden than what you're thinking to know that in terms of actually the material interests of the American people. And like I say, I have no problem with agitating and with this conversation being out in public as some way of maybe, and I think it's a long shot, but I think it's worth it, of signaling to the big donors who are basically the ones who control whether Joe Biden decides to drop out of the race or not, signaling to them that like this is a precarious choice. I think that's legitimate and helpful on some level, but at the end of the day, when you talk about going in and pulling that lever, there's your answer.
Yeah, I mean, there's no arguing with the points that you made. I completely agree. I just, I eventually start to feel like there is no, we keep participating. We just keep participating in this system where we, as progressives, we never win. There's always this threat.
Well, Mercedes, the reason why Mercedes, first of all, the wins are not as big as we want them to be at this point. But the bottom line is that for progressives to win in the way that you're talking about, and again, like when you say progressives aren't winning, you're off the topic of how do I go and vote for somebody who I think, committed rape or sexual assault, right? Like, I mean, that's a different topic. The fact is that the progressives lost in this primary.
Yeah, no, I'm not arguing that.
Right,
at all.
right.
Yeah.
And so when you shift it to that terrain, we're talking about something different. The real question to me, I think, for people to ask, particularly in light of, this latest reporting, is how do I go out and vote for somebody who is, morally repugnant? And the only thing I can say is that, we have someone, and really, you really got to look at it in terms of administrations, in terms of like what they do. Because as far as I'm concerned, all politicians are morally repugnant, or they're all not. It doesn't matter. I want to know what a politician is going to do. And, fortunately for Joe Biden's sake, we have an amazing example of something that, regardless of his politics, he would not have done in terms of the preparation for this pandemic and in the wake of this pandemic. I mean, it's just, like what we're seeing now is relative to, let's say, and it's going to get worse in terms of the from a financial standpoint, is even worse in many respects than the financial crisis and the way that it's being dealt with. But I mean, how progressives win and the fact that we haven't won is a different question.
Yeah, no, I have a hard time accepting any of these ideas that it's like, if the Democratic establishment hadn't completely bulldozed Bernie Sanders, obviously there were, factors of it that included the media. Obviously, there were factors of it that included the Democratic establishment. But to me, that was just, our ideas lost, or maybe not even our ideas because they're very popular. It's just our candidate lost. We lost. We weren't able to get that, that movement. And that's not even the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that I start to resent this constant feeling of, I guess I start to relate to the people, who were saying they weren't going to vote for Hillary Clinton, though I still feel like there was an obvious choice to vote for Hillary Clinton over Trump. Or even to just not vote. I start to understand this feeling of like, being
gross.
Constantly
it's
threatened
gross
with, but isn't it just kind of manufactured consent at some point? Isn't there like, like Kyle Kalinske, excuse me.
When wasn't it?
Argument about like,
I mean,
what was that?
I mean, my point is like, I think the having rapists on the ticket is not new for American history. Like LBJ was, for instance, better than whoever was going to be on the ticket from the Republican side. Like, I think I understand the people who want to take a stand, but that stand is never going to be in symbolic action over voting. And I think the problem is, like, I understand why that's emotionally appealing, but people got to just move on from it. Give Biden your vote, but don't give him your voice, don't give him your labor. And I think that's enough of a line to draw. Because, like, guess what? It's better that we can decide which rapist and the coalition behind him can decide than the days when we couldn't have any influence over that. And
right.
and that class of people would love it if we didn't have any influence over it at all. So, like, I just think there's too much focus over the symbolic act of voting in these conversations. And guess what? We lost this election. We're not going to be able to save it by some symbolic act on the election day.
The only thing I can tell you that is in any way the slightest bit encouraging is that if Biden becomes president in January of 2021, he will enter with a lot less consolidation than the last Democratic president. And so our ability to fight him, guide him, however you want to refer to it, is going to be much greater than it was with Barack Obama. And so, that's a small consolation. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's gross. It's sickening. And
it's a sad day,
Yeah, I agree. Appreciate the call.
And I mean, thanks so much. Have a great one, guys.
You too. Michael Brooks, welcome.
How are you?
Good. You're a little frozen. What's going on with your internet? I heard
internet is, I have no clue. There has been no problem until just yesterday.
Well, we have Judah Freelander here, and
Did you ever work with him?
You know, I had some interaction with him at one point, and I can't remember where. Years and years
You know, when
ago.
he was explaining his comedy, there was some similarities in thought process, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, he's younger than I am, and so I didn't have any sustained, but I can't remember where. Like, I feel like it might have been like, I don't know, that I've run into him at one point, like during the Air America days. I can't. I think it was. I can't remember. Let's get into a little bit of this. Mike Pence went to go visit the Mayo Clinic recently.
God will protect him.
Yeah, God will protect him. But the problem is that God maybe doesn't have the same relationship with everybody else around him. And you think when you go into a hospital, one of the things that's really important that if, having just played the interview with one of the top epidemiologists in the country, who was very much about, we need to figure out how we live with this disease.
Right.
He wasn't saying that we should just open up and force people to go to work, but he was saying, like, we need to have a national conversation about how we can function within, going out into society with the understanding that the three major factors of contraction of this disease are air, air, and air. And the way that happens is that we basically make a compact amongst society, which is we can't, we don't have enough N95 masks to keep the disease out.
Yep.
But we have enough masks that will keep the disease in. So there's two reasons why you wear a mask. One is to keep the disease from coming in. The other is, I have it. I don't realize I have it. I'm asymptomatic. And I'm going to keep it from being aerolized in the same fashion, so that instead of, like, if you're 6 feet away, you're on the edge. If I'm just talking to you and I have it, it's dicey. But if I have a mask on and you're 6 feet away, no way, almost impossible for you to get it. And so the whole thing is what they did in Czechoslovakia, where their whole saying was, your mask protects me, my mask protects you. But Mike Pence, he's only the vice president of the country. He doesn't have to participate in such things. Check out this.
Hi, Doctor. Vice President Pence, nice to meet you. Great to meet you too.
Oh, pause it.
Hi.
Pause it. Why did he do that? Why did he bump his elbow? Why? I thought he was magic. He doesn't have it. He's magic. Keep playing.
Dennis? Hello. Hi. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for being a part of this program. Great job.
Oh, there he is, bumping elbows again.
You went through the coronavirus?
Yes, my wife and I both had it in a very light, mild case. And
when was that?
It was about a month ago.
Yeah.
And so I was, pretty much recovered after 2 days and felt great. And finally tested negative. And then this program came along. And so
look at that. Mask. Oh, the photographer, mask.
But before that, Dennis was the Mayo. He's a Mayo. Correct. Yes, so what we've done.
All right. There's Mike Pence, goes into Mayo Clinic where they have a policy. And apparently they tweeted that they had told Mike Pence the policy. And he just decided, no, I don't need a mask. And apparently his answer as to why was because he wants to look people in the eye when he talks to them. And what was weird was that nobody's masks were covering their eyes. You're still able to look at somebody in the eye when you're wearing a mask over your face, of your mouth.
You should have asked Osterholm about that, Sam.
Well, I interviewed Osterholm last Friday. Oh, I should have asked him if you can see people when you're wearing a mask on your mouth.
Exactly. Like, what's this going to mean for looking people in the eyes?
Are you going to be able to look at people in the eye? I mean, it's just the arrogance. He's doing that has to be a signaling to these morons out there who think this is all a hoax, right? I mean, it has to be that. Why else would you possibly make that decision to do it? He knows exactly what he's doing. It's despicable. It is despicable. They should not have let him into that building if he wasn't going to put a mask on. They should not let them on TV in that scenario. He is propagandizing.
Yeah, he said he could do it because he was getting tested all the time. Therefore, he did not need to wear a mask.
Right. I mean, the guy he was talking to was in there for antibodies testing because he had already had it. So he could not contract it or give it to anybody. Literally the guy he was talking to on that bed. These people are despicable. They're despicable. Apparently we lost Michael because of his internets. Can we get Judah Friedlander on?
Can maybe do him audio only.
Yeah, bring him on to see if he can do. He's restarting his internet. We'll see if we can bring him on via audio, I guess. Might be the other way to do this. Which one should we do with Kushner? Number 7?
They're both pretty good, but I like 7 personally.
Okay. So we all know the story of the air bridge at this point. The air bridge was basically using the U.S. military as a way of flying in all sorts of PPE, personal protection equipment, masks and whatnot, procuring them around the globe, bringing them back to the United States. What the federal government then did, instead of distributing them to hospitals, instead of giving them to private entities and paying a fee for them to distribute to hospitals because maybe they already had the supply line set up, which we're learning in the context of even like toilet paper or food is really important. Instead, what they did is gave it to these private entities to then start a bidding war to see who deserved it more based upon how much money they were showing up with, whether it was a state or a foreign government. And according to Jared Kushner, it was super effective. Now, of course, Jared may also have a slightly different metric in terms of super effective because a lot of those companies were his buddies. Play that clip.
We've never really had a situation where you had to respond in this quick time frame to such a massive surge in demand for supplies that we didn't make in this country. The Vice President's task force asked my Office of Innovation to get involved with the Innovation Office at CMMI to work on some public-private partnerships to work with the existing structures. So we were able to work together to figure out a lot of innovative public-private partnerships to get the missions accomplished. So the first one we did was Project Airbridge, where we were able to get now close to 100 flights, massive cargo flights filled with critical supplies that we didn't make here in America over to our frontline healthcare workers. The healthcare sector in America is mostly controlled by private sector and not-for-profit, so it's not run by the government. So you needed to take a custom-tailored approach, and we created a control tower approach with the private company distributors in order to make sure that we could be as efficient as possible, and it's been quite successful. And now, everyone's talking about testing, and I have to say that the work that's been done over the last 60 days on testing has been absolutely extraordinary. We're at about 5.8 million tests now performed, by far the most in the world, and you're going to see that number continue to accelerate. We're starting another round of calls with all the governors today to ask them what additional supplies they need, what's their 2-month plan, what's their 6-month plan, and right now we fulfilled all the orders that the governors have. They have excess capacity in their states. Yesterday, Governor DeSantis was saying that he has more testing capacity than he has demand for the tests, and so we're really doing quite well with that. And I always find that we see the leading indicators,
and
often
I mean, there's just so many lies here. It's unbelievable. First of all, the number that he cited in terms of tests with tests sent out, they haven't set up the testing mechanisms. There's no place where there isn't a demand for tests. That's absurd. Beyond which, the innovation seems to be, let's use public resources to secure these things and then allow private entities to price gouge. That seems to be the innovation that the innovation office seems to have come up with. Is there any more to that? Do we need to hear any more of that?
Filled all the orders that the governors have. They have excess capacity in their states. Yesterday, Governor DeSantis was saying that he has more testing capacity than he has demand for the tests. And so we're really doing quite well with that. And I always find that we see the leading indicators and often the media sees the lagging indicators, but the leading indicators, our testing, are extraordinarily positive. And I'm very confident that we have all the testing we need to start opening the country in accordance with the safety guidelines that President Trump, the Vice President, Dr. Birx, and Dr. Fauci laid out on April 19th.
Yeah, except the problem with that is that the guidelines that he's referring to, the specific guidelines he's referring to, say that you have to have 14 days of consistent dropping infection rates. There is not a single state in the entire country that has had that meets those guidelines. And so they're ignoring their own guidelines as to them giving blessing of states so-called opening up. Michael, you're back.
Sorry, guys. Sorry about this. Spectrum is not good.
Oh, so you have Spectrum and Matt has
I have
Optimum.
a business. Yeah. But business account. It's been horrible yesterday and today after weeks of no problems. Nothing but problems over the last 24 hours.
I would check your wiring maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a bit paranoid that this is actually all a sign that our information infrastructure is beginning to already crumble, and hopefully it doesn't get worse from this point forward. But.
Stop watching Netflix. Let us do our shows.
Let's talk a little bit about this, the biggest controversy that exists in the country. And this is somewhat up your alley, Michael, in terms of your book, that there has been an inhibition of freedom of speech.
Right.
We now have an intellectual, or I should say a medical dark web that exists,
A medical
if
dark
you
web.
will.
Okay.
And there has been a concerted effort by the powers that be to inhibit the medical free speech of two doctors who own a critical care facility in California, who they're not researchers, but they're doctors,
Right.
have a theory about coronavirus that apparently runs counter to the entire world's medical establishment, not just the United States, not just California, not just probably the city in which they're in, but the entire world. They think this pandemic is basically a hoax. And they had a YouTube channel that apparently the YouTube was taken down. And so who better to comment on the validity of this medical report that was taken down from YouTube than, of course, Dr. Dave Rubin, who appeared on the Tucker Carlson show to explain how authoritarians, and he has an amazing definition about authoritarians that I think is going to blow your mind.
Ready for
Here
this.
it is. Here is Tucker Carlson bringing on Dave Rubin. Is he Dr. Dave Rubin?
Dr. Dave.
We just call him Dr. Dave around here, to explain how YouTube is being authoritarian for taking down information that is completely discredited by every medical outfit that exists.
We're being told we must accept things that would have been completely unimaginable 2 months ago.
Well, Tucker, there's so much to talk about here. First off, I didn't realize I was going to be on a sci-fi show tonight, but we are entering a dystopian future. We are entering an authoritarian future because, as I've said to you before, authoritarians love authoritarianism. So they're taking this opportunity.
Pause it for a second.
Wait, I would
Michael,
say
were you
that makes a
aware of
lot
this?
of intuitive sense.
Were you aware of this?
That authoritarians love authoritarianism.
Well, a lot of times you hear like authoritarians love democracy.
Yes.
They love as many people involved in decision making as possible. Or authoritarians in terms of non-authoritarian leaders, they love not to follow a single person's or entity's edicts.
That was Augusto Pinochet's coup manifesto, was called For an Open Society.
There you go. Continue on here. That was mind blowing. I'm still reading.
That's
in future, because as I've said to you before, authoritarians love authoritarianism. So they're taking this opportunity when we're all confused, we're all locked at home. The only way we can communicate with each other is through their pipes, is through YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and everything else. And they're actually finally saying to us, this is who we are. I mean, the Atlantic is ridiculous. I don't know anyone that reads it anymore.
Whoa.
We're all confused. Why might we be all confused? Is it because maybe there's a television program that they're not controlling that is going out and saying this is all a farce, this is all a joke? Maybe it's because there are doctors who want to make some money at a critical care place saying, this is like the flu, essentially, based upon our back of the envelope work we've been doing in our office. Continue.
I don't know anyone that reads it anymore. But the bigger issue here is the YouTube, Twitter, Facebook component of it, because we are now saying to them, or they're saying to us, we're going to tell you what's true. And if you dare go against what we say is true, not necessarily what is true, but what we say is true, then we're going to boot you. So.
Oh, man.
Wow, that's deep.
Now, just coincidentally, we should say, if you are one of those people out there who are absolutely sick of YouTube booting people because they're putting out disinformation, Dave Rubin has a platform that he's going to start to monetize soon for your YouTube content. There you go.
I mean, I don't know, man. There's a reason why in my book I didn't spend a huge amount of time on Rubin, because I theoretically wanted to write something with a little bit of lasting value. But I mean,
oh, were you afraid?
I was terrified. I didn't want to deal with. I mean, the
dialectic. Authoritarians love authoritarianism. So
I got to tell you, the dialectical relationship. The relationship between authoritarians love authoritarianism is just something I will be the first to admit. I don't have the firepower to take that one on.
And I think
that is like true dialectical nuance thinking right there.
He says, like I've told you before, Tucker, authoritarians like authoritarianism.
It's not the first time you said it.
It's not the first time.
The point is,
it's not like, hey, Tucker, remember when I was really exhausted because I had just been like walking through the Hollywood Hills doing an iPhone video because I was having a meltdown because Quillette criticized me. And then I was negotiating with Glenn Beck. And then Larry King told me that I was a moron, even though I thought he was my mentor. And I was really lacking sleep. And I said, authoritarians love authoritarianism. And we were like, ha, that's funny.
Well, he wants credit. He wants credit. I'm the one who coined the whole thing, who came up with that dynamic after my clinical research, where I found that authoritarians really like authoritarianism.
I think we have a new campaign for social media. Can people dress that quote up and attribute it to Dave Rubin in just the nicest way possible? Do as much, tribute to that quote and the wisdom.
Yeah, no, make it. It's an august quote.
Like with Dave, like this, maybe. Like
I think the one thing I would ask is that anybody who does the type print should be gold. It should be pure gold, because this is something that's going to last through time and teach many of us.
So I will just say real quick. I mean, I am very worried about these platforms and the amount of power they wield and how undemocratic they are. That is a very serious thing. But I think it's fascinating that, my mind goes to what happens to an investigative journalism outfit that is criticizing a hawkish think tank in DC or the arms industry. And the funny thing about what these cases that these guys find, like these two doctors, is it's like, yes, on one hand, it's quote unquote controversial because it's antithetical to literally the closest you can get to a global consensus which is what you said at the beginning. But on the other hand, I mean, if what these doctors are saying, what the Chamber of Commerce wants to be said, so how controversial and underground is it? You know, it's like, sure, it's counter to scientific consensus, but the upshot of what they're actually saying is get back to work, reopen. This is as American as apple pie. This is exactly what, I mean, we're going to only be hearing more of this from every business friendly sector of the press possible. We already heard that. I mean, Friedman did this weeks ago.
Yep. I mean, and we should say that, of course, there's no way to get that doctor misinformation out from these two guys who work at a critical care place, you know, a private critical care storefront type of situation. Except for, of course, on the cable news network, where you can see a discernible difference, where Sean Hannity was most watched in terms of how many cases of infection, perhaps fatalities from coronavirus. Here is Mike
and on the reopen. I mean, sorry, but like whatever the Reopen America task force is that the Trump administration puts together. I mean, I know that already is one, but these guys can end up on it. Here's
Mike Huckabee and Brian Kilmeade saying that tech monopolies should be regulated after removing these California doctors. Now, I will say this. I'm totally for the regulation.
Yeah, 100%.
And if it comes about because they're taking, quacks off of their YouTubes, I'm okay with that. As long as what we're talking about in terms of regulation is not just you need to allow bad medical advice to be broadcast in the course of a pandemic. As long as that's not the regulation, I'm totally down to regulate these guys in such a way that there's a government bureaucrat in every single one of their offices at all times. But here is Mike Huckabee and Brian Kilmeade with really just, they're talking about this, I think, more as a way of saying like, hey, maybe this coronavirus, maybe we're just imagining it.
These guys are medical doctors. They're scientists. For heaven's sakes, they didn't say anything that was really disputable. They were giving facts, figures. They were invoking some opinion in terms of giving analysis of the facts they presented. I thought the most salient point they made in the course of the video, which I did see before it got pulled, was that historically, when you have a pandemic, you quarantine the sick people, not the healthy people. And that was sort of like, you know, the light bulb went off, the one deep in my stomach that I'd swallowed last week after I washed it down with some Clorox. And again, you know, that was a nonsense thing people accused the president of saying, which he never said. But I think YouTube has to answer for the selective content and the way that they have censored anything that just doesn't fit their own agenda. Something is wrong with that, with Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Google.
Unbelievable. I can't underline this enough, how alarming this is. These are doctors that came up with hard number and stats. All they said was, argue with my numbers. I'm not just giving an opinion. Yeah. I'm not spouting out on a soapbox on a vacant LA street corner. I am a doctor. How dare you take down what my facts revealed? Here's him. Here's Dr. Dan Erickson explaining his reaction to having YouTube act against him.
We had tested about 5,213 at the time of that video, and we had about 340 positive, which is 6.5%. So I was giving them raw data. It was not a biostatistical analysis. It was not peer reviewed, and we didn't say that it was. It was merely raw data because they said, what kind of an outbreak are we having? I think YouTube would realize once we get the economy going, you know, and we get people safely back to work, it will be better for them. And so really the herd immunity is really the main thing. How do we get herd immunity, that 50 to 70% mark where the disease is controlled and we can get back to work?
Governor?
Yeah, most of the people who think we ought to shut everything down are people who are on the government payroll, which means their jobs are secure and they're getting paid. There's 26 million Americans who don't have a job right now because we've shut everything down.
So these doctors are basically making the case that they're saying YouTube should agree with, because more people are their medical case is that more people are going to be using. It's going to be better for YouTube if Here is Chris Hayes debunking while essentially Tucker Carlson was promoting these two quacks. Here's Chris Hayes debunking it.
Not because of the wholly unprecedented society-wide shutdown. Well, you are right to ask that question. But Tucker Carlson based his claim in part on arguments from two doctors who own an urgent care center in Bakersfield, California. And they say their research found the coronavirus is basically no worse than the flu. He played a soundbite from one of them. Oh, and here they are last night on a different Trump TV show. Now, of course, most public health experts have dismissed these doctors' findings. According to the University of Washington biologist Dr. Carl Bergstrom, who specializes in infectious disease modeling, quote, they have used methods that are ludicrous to get results that are completely implausible. Two national physicians groups describe the doctor's claims as reckless and added this, quote, as owners of local urgent care clinics, it appears these two individuals are releasing biased, non-peer-reviewed data to advance their personal financial interests without regard for the public's health. Their personal financial interests. Get this. Even YouTube took down a video interview with these doctors for violating their community guidelines. The notion peddled by these doctors and wallpapered all over Trump TV is that this virus is not as deadly as we thought. That is simply not borne out by the evidence.
Okay.
Much of this nation has been locked down.
So the bottom line is they're going on and they're saying, well, we never said it was peer reviewed. But the vast majority of people who are on YouTube, frankly, the vast majority of people, period, in any medium, they don't understand. Like, people don't spend their time making assessments as to what that means. Like, they're not sitting there going like, well, I didn't hear them say it was peer reviewed.
If they came out and did a video and said, we own an urgent care clinic, here are our raw numbers, and this is interesting, check it out, it wouldn't have been pulled, and it wouldn't have gotten a little bit of attention because people are obviously very worried about this, but it wouldn't have become a national propaganda tool.
Right.
So
and of course,
it's like the classic move that when you defend, like, you put out something that's hyperbolic and propagandistic, and then you get called on that, and then you back into safe terrain. That's like always the move.
That's the Mott and Bailey.
Yeah, it's the Mott and Bailey. It's always the move. I mean, look, I am somebody, I do think these platforms need to be heavily regulated or nationalized. I think the direction that YouTube takes, actually, it's a start. But I think whenever you click on, say, Al Jazeera or something, there's a link to a Wikipedia page that will tell you about who owns Al Jazeera and the Qatari government. I think that's also true with NBC and so on. I think that type of thing, I would have no problem. Like, the Majority Report is a supported program through its members that, whatever way. I mean, anybody who has, what did you say?
Soros
is a George Soros funded,
Saul
Alinsky tactic driven liberal media tool. But I mean, I think greater transparency, and also, I mean, even that, like, you're right. I mean, that points to a lack of kind of broad scientific understanding. I mean, it would be an interesting opportunity if you even had people, this would take a lot of resources, but that would be fascinating if YouTube started, instead of pulling things, actually having write-ups on, this is a scientific channel or a channel that claims to, give you scientific information. Here's the difference between a peer review versus raw data. I mean, I think greater and greater.
Part of the problem, though, with YouTube is that, the medium, so much easier to digest video than it is to actually spend any time reading. I mean, for instance,
that's right.
AM Quickie, we just moved it on to the backup channel. We've written that in the description for the past 3 or 4 or 5 days, but people still don't read that because it's got to be in the exact same medium.
Right.
So, I mean, I think there are, maybe they could redo their video in such a way that says, like, none of this is scientific, but it is anecdotal. So
yeah. I mean, honestly, look, if they did it in the beginning, they said, here's our raw data and here's an opinion based off of that. It's not peer reviewed. It's not, it flies in the face of this such and such consensus. But again, I think the bigger problem is that until you get a serious relief program in place, there is going to be an audience of people who want to go back to work as quickly as possible for obvious reasons, because they cannot survive without being out there.
I mean, I think there's two things that are going on here, and I think it's important to not conflate them.
Yeah.
There are people who are worried about how they're going to pay their bills.
Yep.
And pay their rent, to have healthcare. They've lost their jobs, or maybe their business has gone to, whatever it is, who are looking to the government for some type of support in this instance, because they're not allowed to go out. And I think a lot of the people, I mean, the vast majority of people in this country, 70%, are okay with the idea that we're not going to live as if we're in a normal age, but they desperately need support.
Right.
On the other hand, we have a push to open up that is based on almost the exact opposite principle.
Oh, yeah.
Which is that we're going to use opening up as a way of actually providing less to people. So
Absolutely.
This came out, we had been talking about this in terms of Georgia.
Can we note just one other thing really quickly? Huckabee saying the idea that this genius notion that during an epidemic, you just hide the sick people away. That's a talking point that still persists. I can't believe people are still saying that. I don't want to get too much. It's ludicrous.
From the last pandemic that's not the case. When you had a parade in Philadelphia, everybody got really sick. I mean, that what we're practicing is a fairly standard a technique that has been used for pandemics that we've had in the past. But the idea that, I mean, we have two different groups of people here who are upset at the idea of staying home. Those are those people who, I have no way of making my ends meet whatsoever and are looking for government support. And then those people who are using the concept of opening up things as a way of denying people support. So we have from Iowa, I guess it is. Where do I get these? Iowa basically came out, the governor of Iowa basically came out and said, if you do not come out, here it is. Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa, if you're an employer and you offer to bring your employee back to work and they decide not to, that's a voluntary quit. That is the dynamic that we are watching now. That's what Georgia is about. That's what Texas is going to be about. And she said, therefore, they would not be eligible for the unemployment money.
And you line that up with the protections that McConnell wants to ram through for liability, and you have a perfect storm of this thing going on and breaking our healthcare system.
So let me tease that out, because McConnell 2 days ago on an interview said that he is looking to protect companies, employers who bring back their employees from any type of liability, and corporations for any type of liability for bringing their workers into a situation where their health is not protected. Now, right now, there are OSHA laws that say that you have to provide a certain amount of protection. However, OSHA is not really doing much to enforce those. And the risk of legal liability for corporations is already fairly tiny, because a worker would need to prove that they have contracted coronavirus at work. Now, in this instance, it's a little bit easier because people are social distancing. But what this does by saying no liability is it is opening the door for corporations to cut corners. We're seeing, big corporations like Amazon have been doing this. You got the AG in New York looking into it. because OSHA is not on the case. But this is all just essentially a 1-2 punch to allow and force essentially people off the unemployment rolls, to allow corporations to make as much profits as they can with absolutely no liability to these people. They're jammed up. And then
these companies aren't even providing masks. I mean, just to really underline, we're talking about, forget the obvious basic things that should happen, like hazard pay. We're talking no masks. We're talking no, Purell for your hands. I mean, we're talking like, even for
no social distancing,
no social distancing.
And the thing is,
nothing. And let's also mention no liability. And also, I mean,
if there's no liability, they don't have to, because we know how this works with corporations. If you do not have a government agency that is actually on top of them, and of course they can't be in a pandemic, there's just not the resources to do so. The only thing that inhibits corporate malfeasance, and I hope this audience knows this, are lawyers who come in and the threat that they will be sued if they do not adhere to some standards that are, maybe you could say it's nebulous. Like, how can we prove that this person hasn't gotten there? Well, the preponderance of evidence, if there's no mask that you provide, if there's no social distancing you provide, my client has been social distancing at home and is only exposed to their own family, and none of them, they got it from him or her, then there it is. And so this just forces the behavior of corporations to take some measure of responsibility for the health and safety of their workers. And
you're exactly right that it's not only do they not want to do that in the crisis, they want to use this is the disaster capitalism model. This is also a multi-pronged strategy, because we want to gut OSHA anyways. We want to, lower these standards. And, let's also throw in Donald Trump actually using the Defense Production Authorization Act. He's invoked it for masks and medical supplies, but he's actually doing it to get people into these incredibly dangerous meat supply places.
Now, in terms of the meat supply places and the processing plants, it is unclear that his order, as it were, is really anything controversial, that he's actually forced anybody to do it. A law professor has basically argued that all the order does is designate meat and poultry as strategic materials under the Defense Production Act.
Right.
All it does is authorize the Secretary of Agriculture to use his authority under DPA 101, which does not involve forced openings. It's just about allocation of federal resources and priority for federal contracts. In other words, that if there is federal contracts or if there's a need for federal resources, but they can't force these businesses open. It's just Donald Trump basically cosplaying again, like he is actually doing something.
I would be very interested to look, though, at the implications of that order. That's interesting, and that actually would track with the medical supply stuff in terms of his cosplaying. But particularly for undocumented labor at these places, because that is the engine of how these places run.
Any labor, because now if the next wave of, and it's going to be retrospective, you can be sure of it. The next wave of the CARES Act, McConnell gets in his limited liability. We're going to find out that all these workers who are completely expendable to these corporations and to Donald Trump or to whoever, they're going to contract coronavirus. I think at this point you have had, dozens of deaths out of these meat processing plants. They're going to contract it. There's going to be no recourse. And these processing plants, they've just gotten the signal from the president and Mitch McConnell, bring people back. We're in Iowa. We're going to be, if you don't get unemployment. I mean, this is the way that they're doing it. They're jamming people back in, and they're basically saying, hey, you won't voluntarily come out of your shell because you're afraid of this. Guess what? We're willing to consider a certain amount of you as chum and disposable, and you're gonna lose your lives, but we'll be able to have no meat shortages, and the corporations will be able to do so with the full confidence that the United States will prevent them from having to pay for their profits. And you as a worker, if you get sick, you'll have to pay for it. This is going to be all on you. And then on top of all of this, Donald Trump is going out there and basically saying, again, we're not going to give you any money. You're not going to get any basic income unless you work. The only way you will get any benefit whatsoever is if you work, get a paycheck that is subject to Social Security and tax. We will cut that tax for a limited period of time.
And then that's an attack on Medicare and Social Security too. So it loops. So it loops back in. I mean, look, you got to give them credit. They're totally synchronized. This is what Democrats need to learn.
And they're going up against a Democratic Party
Yep.
that is offering nothing in a cohesive manner.
Nothing.
And in fact, has decided that they're not even essential workers.
Nope.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Maybe I got
that hands-free was screwing up. It's Michael from Nebraska.
Oh, Michael Kowalski from Nebraska?
Kowalski.
Indeed, that's my middle name.
Ah, very nice. So
Soon
what's on
your audience will be able to know my identity and steal it. Good luck with it.
Exactly. But you have a meat processing plant in your county, and that's basically what's happening, right?
Yeah, actually, I was going to tell you, the union reached out to my brother's roommate who works there, and right now you'll get a $4 an hour pay increase if you start now and work till, I think, later half of May, plus a $400 bonus. So that's about all the union could muster.
You get a mask?
But he said I'm not sure about personal equipment, but his roommate said, and this is like him paraphrasing, I'm a recovering drug addict, and essentially my lungs cannot afford even pneumonia. So if I get sick, it'd be a death sentence. So he's like, yeah, I'm not going back yet.
Hey.
Yeah, that was just awesome to hear that the plant isn't going to slow down. Right now, Grand Island has 1,000 cases. We are over double Omaha. The next county that's rising is Dawson County, which has a Tyson meatpacking plant. That'll get pretty bad really soon. And another one that's growing is in Dakota County. I'm not real familiar with it, but I do know that it's right on the border with Iowa, with one of their larger communities. So, yeah.
Is that the one that's actually spans like 3 counties or something? I can't. I've gotten my meat processing plants confused.
Sam, what are you doing? You got to keep track of the processing facilities.
All right. Well, Kowalski, appreciate the call.
All right. See you, I guess.
I think you wanted to expand a bit more.
Let's go for another call. Calling from a 262 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Jake from Cudahy.
From where, Jake?
I'm from Cudahy. It's a suburb of Milwaukee.
Okay. What's on your mind, Jake?
Well, I work at Patrick Cudahy. It's a Smithfield plant. We're actually in the middle of a 2-week shutdown.
How many cases were there? I mean, what prompted that shutdown?
Well, I don't know. We had a meeting about it the day before the shutdown was officially announced. So every step of the process I found out through the media and not from our plant. So I woke up, I work third shift. I'm a maintenance mechanic there.
Yeah.
So I woke up in the afternoon and my wife asked me, did you hear anything about your plant shutting down for 2 weeks? And that was the first that I heard about it, and that was the Thursday before last. And I think a big reason why our plant shut down for 2 weeks is because Smithfield had the plant in South Dakota that had, well, now I think they have 600 cases there at that plant. That plant has like 3,700 employees. Ours only has like 1,100. But like the meat packing industry, I've worked in other industries. The quarters, like between, like the working quarters between employees is very tight. You know, I would say like what the media misses in all this is that there's like 3 factors that I think that contribute to like infection. It's like how close you are, how many people you're around, and the duration of time.
Yes.
And I think that like you look at you're standing there for 8 to 10 hours. You're like within like 15-foot circle. There's, you know, like 30 people, and there's really no other way to do it. You know, like I mean, I've seen pictures now of other plants where they have plastic barriers now hanging from the ceiling in between people, but I mean, I don't know how it is now. Like some maintenance men, they were scheduled to work through the shutdown, and different aspects of the plant weren't shut down for like the entire part of it, or like so like different meat processes take like an entire week to like from beginning to end. Like making sausage takes an entire like 4 to 6 days. So they couldn't shut down like the sausage department like for the whole 6 weeks. Like there's like grinding and stuffing, and then you slice the meat after it's been smoked and cured. But it takes like 6 days for it to be smoked and cured. So there's like the sausage department is shutting down kind of staggered. You know?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Right. Once you start it, you got to finish it. You can't just
Yeah, they would have lost millions of dollars if they would have like just thrown all that meat out, and then they would have had the lost time because.
Well, you know, and Jake, I appreciate the call. Thank you for updating us. Let us know, update us if there's something that changes. I'd be curious to hear, you know, what they're going to do with these plants. One of the things that we're also seeing is that there's been, I mean, probably millions of dollars of produce that have been destroyed because the USDA did not early on get involved in setting up alternate supply lines where foods and produce that was grown for institutions and large-scale businesses, they don't have the relationships to get the food to, let's say, supermarkets, or at the very least to like
how about
food lines, food banks.
Food banks. I was going to say, I mean, that's urgent.
That to me would be exactly what you want the USDA to do. And they just were so late in getting involved in this. I mean, like we see this dynamic and it's starting to get sorted out. You can almost see this starting to get sorted out in terms of toilet paper. We talked about this. So they're like, Hayes did a report where it's like, well, initially the thing was everybody was buying the toilet paper. And then it was that people aren't going to work. They're at home. So the demand for domestic toilet paper goes up about 40%, and the demand for institutional toilet paper goes down. But the people who make institutional toilet paper, not quite as plush, don't have a way. They just don't have the relationships to get it at a supermarket. You can't cold call and say like, hey, to your local Kroger.
Hey, you looking for some Port Authority.
But
got
certainly food banks have a relationship with local, state, and federal government.
Yeah.
And you can coordinate that if you are the USDA. In fact, they didn't get on this until late because we don't have a functioning government.
Well, and I think, you know, Mark Blythe made this point to me the other day with regards to, and he wasn't questioning. I mean, look, big picture, there's obviously, corruption in the broadest sense as to why the financial industry gets bailed out before everybody else and how we design things like the CARES Act. We all know that. But part of the function of that, he was saying, was that they don't, like, he was saying, look, the Small Business Administration needs to upgrade its functionality so much in a matter of months to even get what has been allotted to them to actual small businesses, because bureaucratically it does not have the capacity or the design to do that. The only thing that he's like, government has the capacity and the design to do because of policymaking over the last couple of decades. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah,
no, we've been
straight to the banks because it's a functionality issue.
Yes. The pipes simply don't exist. The only pipes that we have to blow money out is through the Fed, and the relationships they have in terms of the supply lines is all to the bank.
Is all to the banks.
Major corporations
and
who have the ability to say, like, I'm Boeing. All right, here's money. I'm the airline industry. Here's money. And that's it. And we could, if we had set up postal banking, we could do it. If we had maybe through the Social Security Administration, we could do it. If we could, but we have that has been the problem from day one, is that we have no infrastructure in which to help people, broadly speaking, in society. So if we had we could expand Medicaid, still be difficult, but that's why you want a single payer to exist already, so that you just take that question off the table. That's why you want postal banking, so you have the ability to bank everybody in the country, and you could do it that way. I mean, there's a myriad.
That's also the way that you could easily deliver the $2,000 a month debit card, which everybody should get for a year. Oh, where do you get it? The bank, your bank, the post office.
Yes.
I mean, that would be an amazing, some type of, speculative. You can't actually do a study, but if the people like Marissa Baradaran, who've already documented all of the incredible gains you get from postal banking, and then you applied them to this pandemic, I mean, there would be such an enormous alleviation of suffering if we just even had that one thing.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 309 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? We get? Right. 309.
Is that me?
Yeah.
Hey, Sam, how's it going?
Good. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Andrew from Michigan.
Andrew from Michigan. What's on your mind?
Really excited to hear your guys' discussion on Monday in the context of the Mark Cuban call.
Yeah.
Talking about job guarantee versus UBI. So if you have some time, I'd actually like to talk about a progressive framework to build up to the same conclusion Mark had.
Okay.
So anyway, there's, I think, three reasons that from a progressive standpoint, you would support job guarantee over UBI. One being, if you're kind of getting down to UBI, you're buying into the neoliberal framework that unemployment is kind of unavoidable. And so we can solve that by keeping the same construct, but then turning people into consumption units, and that solves the issue.
Right.
Number two, it also keeps the same framework of unemployment being an individual issue. So what I mean by that is if you're unemployed, it's a product of the choices you've made, or perhaps your work ethic as a person, versus a more systemic issue that comes from a lack of aggregate demand in the system. There aren't enough jobs because there's not enough demand in the economy, versus it just being a product of an individual situation. And number three, it kind of ignores the social aspect, UBI does. So there have been some studies that talk about the social impacts of unemployment in terms of mental illness, in terms of lack of purpose, or lack of dignity. And those are in fact greater than the paycheck that comes from having a job.
Right. And I would add as an addendum to that, like, people have stuff that they like to do, or, developing skills for people has value. And you're not allowing people to necessarily just atrophy, which is not to say, I want to be clear here, that when you're in like a situation where, I don't know how long it would take to ramp up a federal jobs program, but in the meantime, I have no problem with sending checks out to people. But I like the idea, and I appreciate the call, Andrew. I like the idea of a federal jobs program because you're doing all those things that you just talked about. And you're also basically saying that the federal government is perfectly legitimate for the government to hire people to better society.
You're also helping labor unions. I mean, there's an enormous, power advantage there for reviving labor, which is a really big deal. I want to.
Did you see the Mark Cuban video?
I did see the Mark Cuban video. It's hilarious. It's great. It's like
he's trying to get on the ballot.
He's trying to get on the ballot. He's trying to get on, and he's also seeing. This is the financial page this is the Financial Times editorial page. Like there's always been one sector of the capitalist class that has understood that you don't want society in complete and utter ruin if you want to maintain some social stability and build businesses. But I just want to add too, there's a book by Jeremy Rifkin called The End of Work, which I think came out in the 90s, but it anticipated particularly a lot of the robotic stuff, which it might be overstated, I think, but automation is obviously going to take some people's jobs. And I just remember in that book, he really, I think he did have some idea of maybe something like a UBI, but his point, and when you get to federal jobs guarantee, and you also go back and you think about programs in the New Deal, you can really start to think much more broadly about what those jobs would be. And you can start paying, like, people can be great mentors and tutors and artists and builders. I mean, there's so many people that who contribute an enormous amount to their community, but it just isn't going to be recognized in a market context. When you have a federal jobs program, you can start to think about the social utility of jobs, and that has an enormous upside.
I was just talking to someone the other day about the WPA, and up, in New England and through New York, and I imagine a lot across the country, you have these historic signs that you see, and behind every one of those historic signs were artisans who were paid in the WPA to create the signs, historians who were paid to study the signs, writers who were paid to write up and describe these things. I mean, it enriches our society. And this is a perfect opportunity for some societal enrichment. And there is no imagination in this regard. And it's, I love the idea of someone promoting it. I mean, the way he promoted it was fairly limited, like we'll do contact tracing and this and that, but we're going to have 40 million people unemployed, and maybe 35, who knows? And so we're going to have to get rather imaginative. And, in the conversation that we had with Adam Tooze the other day, like, I think our society is still in a state of shock. Like we're not even remotely close to the point of recognizing what the situation we're in is at this point. And so hopefully, as people talk about it more, we will see. Bullprog on the IM. So when is the debate against Justin Amash for the Libertarian candidacy? If he jumps in, I might fight him on that.
That candidacy is unhelpful for beating Trump.
It seems to me
his whole brand, because look, Justin Amash, I'll give him more credit for, certain foreign policy things and for opposing Trump in a slightly coherent way. His politics are very right wing and very libertarian, but his whole brand and his whole sales pitch is #resistance. It's not helpful.
I don't know who would entertain, aside from the libertarians, who would entertain voting for Justin Amash that was entertaining voting for Trump. Those two, absolutely, those two circles on the Venn diagram, they do not overlap.
No, honestly, like people have been asking me, and I we'll see. But I like Jesse Ventura, but I will just say up top, Jesse Ventura actually is infinitely more plausible as somebody who would pull votes from both sides. Amash is only pulling votes from people who vote for a Democrat.
Agree. Nancy's second fridge added to the list of names Sam can't pronounce. Morgan Harper lost in Ohio. You said Megan at the top of the show. I thought I said Morgan. I can definitely.
Oh, that's too
pronounce
bad.
voting.
But
Yeah,
she's
she
young.
lost
She's got
68 to 32.
Oh, that's not bad. I mean, some of these people running,
68 to 32.
Ooh, no, I misheard you. That's not a great margin.
But was a great candidate.
Yeah, but I think some of the people running are, they're younger. They've got stuff ahead of them.
Also, a tough environment to run in. Sam Fan 1. Sam, I need a haircut bad. Should we all vote for Jesse the Body Ventura? Oh, there you go. Desperate Koala. Sam, love the haircut. Got my sub for another year. You gorgeous fellow. Oh, thank you. Anyway, I'm curious to know what your line is for one candidate being better than the other as a rationale for constantly dropping to our knees for the DNC. Like, what is it that people?
I like how they buttered you up before that.
Well,
before the most.
What I love is you don't have to drop to your knees. In fact, it'd be helpful to stand up when you like. Why is this like?
I think you might be doing a bit, Sam.
No, I don't think it is.
I
How
think
much
it's
better do they have to be? One policy, half a policy, like dropping Medicare to 60. I mean, aside from the fact that I'm not really sure there's a great deal of evidence for being much better than Trump on COVID, aside from your insistence, I think it's all together possibly might end up worse. Look, I'm sorry. If you don't believe that I don't think I still have Henwood's treaties on Facebook, but if you don't believe that Joe Biden's administration would have cut the pandemic response team on the National Security Council. Incidentally, he was part of the administration that put it on there. If you believe that they would have cut the DHS head of pandemic response or the CDC people embedded for a pandemic response, I mean, then I don't know what to tell you. But I will tell you this, that when you phrase it as like, I've got to drop to my knees, like in some way, like I am humiliating myself to pull this thing, you're revealing something about yourself. Yeah. What you're revealing is that this is about you, and your sense of my own dignity is so tied up in this. Look around, see the millions of people who are existing. See the people who are being forced to go back in these meat processing plants. See the people who are going to be forced to go back to work in Iowa, in Georgia, in Texas, or they won't get any unemployment insurance. See them, and if you can't get past them, if you can get past them to the idea that you're humiliated because you've got to drop to your knees, maybe your polling place is very low or something.
I hope you got pads for your knees, Sam, because you're so used to being down there for the Democratic establishment.
I gotta jump up to make that. Jump up to make that vote. Honestly,
Matt, what are you gonna say, Matt?
Well, like, it's so obvious how they can't just say, if they would just phrase it like, you're saying I have to vote for Joe Biden, then it's like, well, yeah, just vote for Joe Biden. It's check a box, you idiot, and then do whatever you want to do for the rest of the time. Exactly. But they're telling themselves, because they have to spice it up with a metaphor like drop to your knees. Like, I've never done that in a polling place before.
Right. I can't believe this new law where you have to actually slice your testicles off and hand them over to Joe Biden as instead of actually just voting. That to me seems like a little too much.
I would just
thanks for those.
that was nice.
This is why I want Jamie on Wednesdays.
I just think that you can't, I mean, I'll keep saying what I've been basically saying about this past several weeks, which is that I don't have any bedtime story for people. Like, I don't think that the Democratic Party has been pushed in any way meaningfully to the left. I mean, we can keep having that debate. I don't see it. I don't buy it. I think this is a defeat, and I think it's a very bad and horrifically timed defeat. I think that a Biden administration is not good. And, I'll just keep running down the list. But no one has been able to provide me with a coherent argument as to why a Democrat in that office isn't preferable to a Republican. And I've been trying to hear it. And one tendency that I do notice that I really would jettison, and I won't belabor it because you guys just made the same point, is I think even the distinction Matt has been drawing, I think if somebody was saying you need to go and spend hours of your life to elect Joe Biden, I actually would understand why you would say F that. this is somebody that I oppose ideologically. This represents a party that I don't want to sort of expend energy on. That I can understand. But the very simple act of simply voting and making a binary choice, it's not that melodramatic.
Yeah, but you do have
just
to,
not
you
that
do have to
melodramatic.
get on your knees to do it.
Hey,
Imagine
that's why I do yoga, man. I stay in good shape.
Imagine
I don't want to pull a hamstring when I submit to the Democratic establishment. I mean, honestly, look, there's a strike going on tomorrow on May 1st. Again, you want to make the case. I'm actually completely at a point where I think that there are things that are absolutely structurally more important than these elections and are the most promising grounds for actual potential reform. But in the context of the election, you make a basic cost-benefit analysis.
No.
I don't know what to tell you.
Neoliberal shill. Michael.
Yeah, and again, yeah, and I say that as somebody who has no. Look, I find it really I don't care about the platform committees. I don't care about the task forces. I think we need to be clear-eyed about what we're up against in either direction. And I actually think from that clear-eyed non-melodrama, you can still realize, oh, it actually is it is preferable ground to fight an exhausted, dying, third way establishment that is absolutely something that needs to be fought and taken on politically, no question, versus a dynamic, resourceful, and in conjunction with multiple other heads of state right now, resurgent quasi-authoritarian right. I don't think it's that hard to figure out.
I agree. I mean, and I would even say that all things being equal in terms of those two entities, even if Joe Biden was vibrant, I just think that the left, the better enemy for the left is the center.
Well, I'm saying, by the way, when I say dying, I don't mean, I think that literally it could be Buttigieg. It's both. Well, I mean, look at Macron. I mean, Macron is in that distillation, and he is a failure as a head of state because that model of solving problems is shrinking. Like the 90s, we don't agree with the policy sets, but there was room to govern like that. The room to govern like that in 2020 is shrinking.
I think also, yes, metaphorically and literally, though, I do think that there is a quality about Biden. I mean, just look at the fight that they were having over digital, right? Like, I think that is, exemplifies the fact that there's no plan. The idea, I think when they say why am I running to restore dignity? I think that was actually sort of true. I think they default to a lot of the positions that they've held, but it also indicates to me that there is no agenda. And when there's no agenda, there's more opportunity. But I think just broadly speaking, generically speaking, for instance, I think Clinton had a very specific agenda. Some of it good, a lot of it I didn't necessarily agree with, but I still think that she would have been a better foil for the left than Donald Trump.
I think it's a question of process of elimination. So I think that these are both 100%, and maybe, and this is where there are some differences. I think if you're on any type of, the left and Clinton and Biden, they are enemies. They are class enemies, whatever way you want to define it. They are absolutely political enemies. And by the way, I have no doubt, looking at the revelations coming out of the UK, where they did things even as bad as specifically people inside the Labour Party sabotaging Jeremy Corbyn to such a degree that they targeted Facebook ads at him and other members of Labour Party leadership to mislead them that they were actually executing the strategy overall, which they weren't. I mean, this stuff is really bad. And I have no doubt for a second that plenty of people in the Democratic Party would have done exactly the same thing to Bernie if he was the nominee, and they would prefer Trump to Bernie. So again, I'm not in any way minimizing. I'm just saying process of elimination. And I'm saying we do need to have, and the fight with people, the Bidens and Clintons of the world is in no way over. But we have to continue in that fight. I'm actually saying I don't want a two-front war, frankly.
Yes.
I like a one-front war. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make one quick point. I have no illusions about how uncorrupted or corrupted our democracy is. I think it's pretty bad right now. But at the same time, put yourself in the place of somebody who can't vote like in time in history and think like, okay, next year you're going to be allowed to vote. Are you going to look at the candidates and say like, oh, neither one of these guys is pure enough for me to vote for? Like, that's an absurd way of looking at the franchise, right?
Yeah, I
like,
think about Reagan's call too a few weeks ago, where he's like, there will simply be people who will suffer under a Trump administration who cannot vote for themselves.
But by the way, I don't know if we will vote in November. I mean, you know,
well, that's an entirely another question. I mean, we are so far from voting in November. We're going to have to go through the alien invasion. We're going to have to go through the Oprah insurrection, and before we even get to November. I mean, I think that takes us up into mid-September, what I've just outlined.
Yeah, exactly.
Calling from a 604 area code. Who's this?
Hi, is this me?
Yes, it is. Who is this? And what are you calling about? From where?
This is Casey from Vancouver.
Casey from Vancouver,
Canada. I am a little bit
drunk,
at a loss for words.
Oh, okay.
Stoned, very stoned.
Okay.
Sounds more like stoned.
Great.
Does not defy stereotype.
Okay.
But I was wondering whether or not I've heard you talking about, you know, the whole Trump disinfectant thing, and I was wondering if you have covered the Vic Berger thing, the Vic Berger video.
I have not
on the
covered.
topic.
I have not, but we will look for it.
I love Vic Berger.
Definitely check it out. It really sheds a different light on it, because after watching it, I discovered that I did not know. There's actually a large sect of the natural health industry that prescribes a substance, chlorine dioxide. It's sometimes called CD protocol, and sometimes it's called miracle mineral solution.
Okay.
And they prescribe it to to cure kids of autism.
Oof.
And stuff along these lines.
Yeah.
And there's
All right. Well, I will check it out.
like some.
We'll check it out and we'll play it.
Okay. Anyway, and rooting for you guys in the healthcare department.
Thank you, Casey.
Seriously.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.
Hang in there. Okay.
Yeah, drink some water.
Colin from
you said drunk. That did not seem like an opening. That was definitely a high call.
It looks like certain supply lines are still flourishing.
Calling from a 901 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, is this me?
Yes, it is.
Hey, this is Joe from Memphis. First, I wanted to say,
Are you high?
I've been watching your I'm
Yes.
19. I've been watching your show for like 3 years. I really like you guys. I'm really inspired by all the stuff you do. I wanted
Thanks,
to
Joe.
ask about
Thanks, man.
the Senate. So, as an institution, I was just writing a paper on this for college classes remote now, but it seems impossible for 60 votes to ever happen in the near future. Do you have any specific remedies for that? Like,
Get rid of the filibuster.
option? Get rid of it?
Yep.
Just
Get rid of it.
or-
Get rid of it. It's already a highly undemocratic institution, right? It was developed as one that was even more undemocratic than it is now. When
Right,
states would select who the senators are. We also have, just in terms of undemocratic, you have, I don't know, a fourth of the country controls 60% of the power in the Senate. I mean, those are just rough numbers. I would get rid of the filibuster. It's an undemocratic institution. I know that it's been helpful in the past, but I also think it's been detrimental in the past. I think it's like we need to make sure that the American public understands who is responsible for what on any given vote or policy. And so I would say get rid of the filibuster, period. End of story. That won't happen because guys like Chris Coons, he wants to bring it back for judges. if the Democrats take over. And the reason why a guy like Chris Coons wants to do this is they want to put themselves at the fulcrum of power. And the way that they can go about doing that is by forming like what they call transpartisan alliances, which in and of itself is not bad. But what they do is they find out where will this bill fail. And it will usually be somewhere between 49 and 60 votes. And we're going to get together and we're going to push it in this corporatist manner. And it's basically like, it's almost like the way that Cuomo works in New York. All this stuff happens. His fingerprints are not on it in some way. And that's the way you get these policies that have really no responsiveness to the American public. So I would
suggest real quick, in addition to all of the sort of big picture stuff about understanding how the Democratic Party has changed, and that's important to read up about. And we've done like the woman who was on the show wrote the piece about the Atari Democrats or the Jacobin. But specifically, if you want to understand Chris Coons and what Sam is saying, read a couple of profiles of Joe Lieberman and the way he operated in the Senate. And they will explain to you exactly where the worst of these people come from. Because I think there's the big ideological tendencies and the big, how the institutions change because of money and different systems changes in the economy. But specifically as like a sanctimonious right-wing deal maker who always wanted to put himself in the middle of different plays to get the Sunday morning treatment. Joe Lieberman is like the par excellence, and that's who Chris Coons wants to be.
Yep.
I mean, that's how repulsive Chris Coons is. We gotta. Jessica
Skarains.
Yeah, look at her. Because we gotta get that guy out of the Senate.
I think we played her interview. Appreciate the call. Thanks for listening. I did an interview with her on Ring of Fire, and I think we played that during Christmas break as well on this program. Colin from Nebraska. Sam, I appreciate your handyman advice. Would like some on getting new windows if you have any. What you got to do if you're getting new windows is have an ability to reach into your pocket and a credit card with a high amount of that you're allowed to charge, because it's expensive. New windows. Very tough. I don't have anything to say. Cosby from Tallahassee. Sam, I've been a member of MR for a few years now. I'm also a patron of all the MR Crew podcasts. Thanks for everything you do. Today is my birthday. I was hoping to get a shofar on this dismal day. Peace and love from Tallahassee. Thank you for your support.
Stay safe.
Jesse 2020. It's time for the candidate we deserve. Anti-shoplifting.
I like Jesse Ventura.
Anti-shoplifting jihadi. Should be pointed out that Mayo Clinic took down a tweet saying they told Pence the protocols prior to his visit. That self-censorship reflects fear of retribution from the federal government. Subtle but scary. True. Very true.
Of course.
AWB. I was excited to hear the job guarantee and UBI discussion Monday, Cuban interview segment. There is a progressive framework to build the same conclusion. I think you called in. You can see Pavlina Tichnerva at Bard College. We'll look into that. Roof Bottle Dawn. That's a good idea. I mean, I just am so, we are in such desperate need for a massive jobs program by the federal government. It's not necessarily to the exclusion of anything else, but it just seems to me that we are so desperate, in such desperate need for that. But I think
the
that's going to
jobs
become
program
more,
is structural. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can pump some cash into people's pockets. That's good, but I think like it's not just structural in terms of what you're creating with that bureaucracy. It also is basically you are changing the perspective of people have towards what government can do.
Absolutely. And again, too, when you have the Rifkin approach too, it addresses, because some people say UBI is, I think we've explained a lot of the problems with it, but I have a certain sympathy when people say, in the general sense, livelihood should not be dependent on work. And we all agree with that because we all support a broad social system that ensures everybody. But I think the interesting thing is distinguishing that people do want purpose, they do want meaning, and they do want to contribute. And what a federal jobs guarantee that facilitates high social value jobs and doesn't just look at things in a market sense can meet in the middle of you should get paid to just do things that are socially productive. And the shorthand is we still call them jobs. But because we're taking this on with a social metric, we're investing in a much broader set of things.
Yep. Let's play this clip. This is reminiscent of Donald Trump getting on the phone with folks in Ukraine saying, I've got your money for you, but you got to do me a favor. Here's Donald Trump, clip number 1, at his daily dog and pony show saying, and this is after he says he wants payroll cuts instead of stimulus checks. The payroll cuts, again, you need to have a job. 40 million Americans won't within a couple of weeks. You need to go into that job, and we're not going to give you any liability or protection. We're not going to even put any pressure on corporations. In fact, we're going to alleviate all the pressure on corporations to do the right thing in terms of protecting you. And on top of which, we're also, for down the road, because we like to have a long view of these things, going to set up cuts to Social Security and Medicare in the future. Then on top of that, he's going to say, but in short term, if you want funding for your states so that there's no austerity there, you're going to have to help my reelection campaign by promoting anti-immigration policies. This is clip number 1.
President, it's actually Secretary Mnuchin as well. What about the idea of another round of stimulus payments to American taxpayers directly? Democrats, of course, up on the Hill are talking about the idea of a guaranteed income, which obviously could go on for months and months and months.
Yeah.
What about another round of
Well, I like the idea of payroll tax cuts. I've liked that from the beginning. That was the thing that I really would.
Pause it. Incidentally, he's been spending a lot of late nights with Arthur Laffer. And Arthur Laffer, as you know, came up with the Laffer curve that supposedly showed that once you get to a certain point of taxation, people's willingness to work goes down because they're not making as much money, because they're having to give the government so much. And so he was the genius who came up with the idea of cutting taxes across the board in Kansas. When Sam Brownback got into office in 2012, it so devastated the Kansas education system. It so cut revenues, because his argument is when you cut taxes, you actually increase revenues because business, it became such a disaster that the Republican-controlled lawmakers in Kansas reinstituted the taxes. Sam Brownback was literally ejected by the Republican Party into another twilight plane of existence, where he is now and has been for 3 or 4 years, since leaving Kansas, the ambassador to faith. So he's just sort of floating somewhere in the ether. And Arthur Laffer been doing some late night conversations with Donald Trump, probably because his buddy Moore and Kudlow introduced these idiots together. And that's where this whole thing is coming from.
From the beginning, that was the thing that I really would love to see happen. A lot of economists would agree with me. A lot of people agree with me. And I think, frankly, it's simple. It's not the big distribution, and it would really be an incentive for people to come back to work and for employers to hire. The double tax on the company and also on the person. That's what I like. And something like that could happen. Also, I think you have to look, because a lot of people are talking to, I assume your next question would be about states. And Steve and I talk about it, and I talk about it with Mitch and with Kevin and with everybody. And the problem with the states is we're not looking to recover 25 years of bad management and to give them the money that they lost. That's unfair to other states. Now, if it's COVID related, I guess we can talk about it. but we'd want certain things also, including sanctuary city adjustments, because we have so many people in sanctuary cities, which I don't even think are popular even by radical left folks, because what's happening is people are being protected that shouldn't be protected, and a lot of bad things are happening with sanctuary cities. But that's just standing up here answering this question. That's one of the things I think about. If we were going to do something for the states, I think they'd probably want something having to do with sanctuary cities, something having to do with other different points that we can discuss a little bit later on.
Points. There you go. Other different points. First off, the idea that they're going to punish and discipline states who haven't been responsible. What about doing that with the airline industry, which has been taking all of their record profits and putting it in their pocket in stock buybacks? What about doing it with Boeing, which have been taking their money instead of like redesigning their planes, have been basically just doing payouts for shareholders, i.e. Their C-suites and their corporate board of directors. We don't do that with any companies. So the idea that we would do that with states, of course, this is just a way of imposing austerity. Right. And I don't even know if that's constitutional, but it really doesn't matter. It's just repugnant.
Well, and I will say, I mean, and obviously we know that this is going to be a major part of the reelect is attacking immigrants and fear mongering about asylum seekers, and that's been not only a campaign thing. I mean, that's a major policy architecture of this administration. And there's some numbers from Stan Greenberg. I think I've mentioned them. I don't think I mentioned them on air. I know we've talked about it a little bit. He's a pretty, he's kind of a brand as a Democratic political consultant, but he is a actual pollster. He agree, disagree. He works with actual numbers. He has some academic pedigree. And, we could see this in 2018. It didn't work. I mean, the country is not necessarily, most people don't support open borders, but most people are not violently opposed to asylum seekers or immigrants generally. So I'm actually not, look, it's disgusting, it's despicable, and it's already harming a lot of people. But I think you're going to the well with actually a relatively narrow set of voters. I don't think it has that much appeal.
Final call of
even
the day.
Amongst people on the far right,
right.
don't support what he's doing.
Calling from a 734 area code. You are the final call of the day.
Is that me?
It is you. Who is this? Where are you calling?
My name's Connor. I'm from Ypsilanti, Michigan.
Connor from Ypsilanti. What's happening in Ypsilanti or whatever that is?
So I've been hearing a lot about the general strike going on the 1st.
Uh-huh.
And I've been organizing my workplace. I'm over at like a medium-sized chain pizza place.
Great.
And
Awesome.
we put in a list of demands, and we've already got indications that they're willing to negotiate with us.
Sweet.
That's awesome.
What kind of demands are you asking for?
Right now, we're asking just for hazard pay. They gave us $1 to start this out, and that was like tolerable when they weren't having more people on. But in order to get the PPP stuff, they had to put more people on, and so it's no longer really acceptable.
They had to put more people
So we're trying
on?
to go for. Yeah, they have to fill a certain number of hours in order to get the bailout money.
And that cuts into your profits because you're getting tips.
Yeah, usually. But since there's basically no one coming in and doing card orders or cash orders, not really any tips for us.
Right.
And with more people on shift, we're more at risk.
Right.
They did provide us masks, which is nice.
That's good.
But
And what about do you make the pizza? What do you do at the pizza place?
I'm a shift lead, but everyone basically does everything at the shop.
Maybe, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the shop enough, but I've noticed there are some places, some hardware stores will put up plastic, plexiglass between. I don't know if that's doable. I don't know.
Well, we definitely have the sneeze guards up. That's always been a thing.
Oh, that's good.
But they recently started doing curbside pickup, and that's also not really acceptable for us because that's an unnecessary point of contact.
Right.
Normally they can just come in and pick up their pizzas from the rack.
Right.
And so if they're going to be doing that, I feel like they need to provide us a little bit more hazard pay or discontinue that service.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or at the very least, like set up, I don't know, racks on the outside.
Yeah. Or at least nearer to the door that like they can just get out, go grab them and come in or go and leave. They
Yeah.
don't have to go all the way into the store.
Yeah. All right. Well, good for you. It's always good to ask, folks. Start up. Ask those demands. Appreciate the call.
That's basically what I was calling for. Just boost the signal, try and get everyone you can to organize your workplace, man.
Yep. That is hugely important. I appreciate the call, Connor. There was a piece, Nolan Hamilton in
I think it's Hamilton Nolan.
in these times talking about, it is a lot to ask for a candidate to come in and create any type of like worker solidarity over the course of an election campaign. This is work that needs to be done in between elections. All right, let's go IMs. Folks, that's it for calls. IMs, roof bottle dawn. The analogy for reopening states, the country is a skydiving analogy. You jump, pull the ripcord, and see that you've slowed down, but you don't cut yourself away from your parachute while you're still hundreds of feet above the ground. Puddle Duck, if the choice was between Stalin and Stalin, but he's better on LGBT issues, I'm going to vote for the latter. Indeed. And Bonora, now that the right-wing governments have concluded it's fine to act like the virus is exaggerated and over, and that it's a great opportunity to roll back the last century New Deal progressive era reforms while handing trillions of dollars with bipartisan support to the super rich. Is there any degree of COVID-19 sickness, injury, or death which might alter this course? I think we will see.
I think what you will see is, you see it with the Cuban quote. And again, if you read, I always mention the Financial Times because they're sort of like, now, granted, they still tried to destroy and help destroy Jeremy Corbyn. And, again, we got to make serious distinctions here and don't get overly excited. But I think there is a contingent, much less so in the United States than there is in Europe, but there is a contingent of the capital class that at some point is like, you know what? We need some basic social cohesion here so the whole thing doesn't blow up. And I do think that division is opening more right now.
Joyce from PA, how many of these Fox pandemic truthers are broadcasting from their homes? Well, to the extent that any of them are not, they're going into the studio when there's very few people there. So let's see them broadcast from a hospital. Congressional baseball fan Sam, appreciate the appropriate level of baseball talk today in these uncertain times. Which of these ideas do you think has the best chance of happening? A condensed MLB season in Arizona and Florida, the annual congressional baseball game on June 10th, or Sean Hannity's Yankee Stadium Jonestown plan? I don't know. A square, Sam, Mike, like Emmanuel used to say, never let a crisis go to waste. These people are just despicable. But I think California, a few other states have established the burden is on the employer. California and Illinois they're trying to roll back in Illinois on the employer to establish the employee in certain industries did not contract COVID at work. Remember, this issue impacts working class and WC and liability claims, workers' compensation. All right, two more. Bearded Cripple, what is the betting that when they rehire the people the companies laid off, they'll be on worse terms they had before the crisis? I would say odds in that favor. And the
Gotta get out there and organize.
And the final IM of the day. Reno Icardo. Yo, I work in the construction in Reno, Nevada. We were told by our foreman that OSHA was fining individuals up to $6,000 if we were caught not maintaining that 6 feet distance, which is like impossible. So what you think? Thank you all. OSHA's not going to fine individuals. They fine but that's them, good for them, at least to promote the 6 feet distance, but they should also be providing you other protections. And of course, that doesn't happen in construction. All right, folks, see you. Mike will be here tomorrow.
Have a good one.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in.